The towering spires of Terra's hive cities cast their shadows across billions of souls during the closing years of the Age of Strife, and among those countless masses emerged individuals whose destinies would reshape the galaxy itself. In the depths of one such sprawling urban monument to humanity's endurance, a child was born who would become known throughout the Imperium and beyond as Fabius Bile, the primogenitor, the Spider, the Clone Lord. His origins lay not in noble houses or warrior cultures, but in the teeming undercity warrens where survival demanded both cunning and an intimate understanding of the human condition in all its frailty. The records of his early life remain fragmentary, obscured by the passage of millennia and the deliberate obfuscation that would later characterize his existence. What emerges from the scattered accounts is the picture of a youth possessed of an exceptional intellect, one that manifested early in an obsession with biological systems and the mechanisms that governed life itself. While other children of the hive learned to scavenge and fight for scraps, the future Fabius Bile dissected vermin and studied the patterns of disease that swept through the lower levels with clinical detachment. His aptitude for the biological sciences did not go unnoticed by the recruitment cadres of the nascent Space Marine Legions. During the Great Crusade's early expansion, when the Emperor's gene-forged warriors scoured Terra for suitable candidates, the young man's combination of intellectual prowess and physical potential marked him as ideal material for the Third Legion. The Emperor's children, even in their earliest incarnation, sought perfection in all things, and this extended to their recruitment practices. They did not simply seek warriors, they sought individuals capable of embodying the highest ideals of human achievement. The transformation from hive-born youth to Astartes proved particularly suited to his temperament. Where many aspirants struggled with the psychological conditioning required to accept their posthuman nature, he embraced it with an enthusiasm that bordered on the unsettling. The gene seed implantation process, the hypno-conditioning, the surgical modifications that would grant him superhuman capabilities, all of these he approached not as trials to be endured, but as fascinating studies in biological enhancement. His instructors noted his unusual tendency to observe his own transformation with the same clinical interest he had once reserved for dissecting rats. Upon completion of his transformation into a full battle brother of the Emperor's children, his talents were quickly recognized and channeled toward the Legion's Apothecarian. The role of Apothecary within the Space Marine Legions carried responsibilities far beyond battlefield medicine. These warrior surgeons served as the guardians of their Legion's genetic legacy, responsible for harvesting and maintaining the precious gene seed that allowed for the creation of new Astartes. They were students of the human form in its most elevated state, charged with understanding the intricate biological machinery that the Emperor had crafted to serve as humanity's ultimate protectors. Fabius Bile excelled in this role with a dedication that impressed even his perfectionist legion. His understanding of gene seed cultivation techniques advanced rapidly, and he demonstrated an intuitive grasp of the complex biochemical processes that governed Astartes' physiology. Where other apothecaries followed established protocols with religious adherence, he began to identify inefficiencies and propose improvements. His modifications to standard gene seed storage procedures increased viability rates by measurable percentages. His refinements to the implantation process reduced rejection rates among aspirants. These contributions did not go unnoticed by the Legion hierarchy. As the Great Crusade expanded and the Emperor's children found themselves fighting across increasingly distant battlefields, the demand for new Astartes grew correspondingly. Bile's innovations in gene seed cultivation and enhancement procedures proved invaluable in meeting these demands while maintaining the Legion's exacting standards. His work ensured that each new generation of Emperor's children could match or exceed the capabilities of their predecessors. His rise through the ranks of the Apothecarian reflected both his technical competence and his growing influence within the Legion's command structure. Fellow apothecaries sought his consultation on difficult cases. Line officers requested his presence during critical operations where his expertise might prove decisive. The Legion's senior leadership began to view him not merely as a skilled technician, but as a strategic asset whose knowledge could provide tactical advantages in the field. The appointment to Chief Apothecary of the 3rd Legion represented the culmination of this steady ascent. The position carried with it responsibilities that extended far beyond individual battlefield medicine or even gene seed cultivation. As Chief Apothecary, Bile became responsible for the biological integrity of the entire Legion. Every enhancement procedure, every genetic modification, every experimental treatment fell under his purview. He wielded authority over life and death decisions that could affect thousands of his battle brothers. In this elevated position, his fascination with the limits of transhuman physiology found new outlets for expression. The standard Astartes enhancement procedures, while remarkable achievements of genetic engineering, represented only the beginning of what might be possible. The human genome contained vast untapped potential, and the techniques used to create space marines had barely scratched the surface of what could be achieved through careful manipulation of biological systems. His early experiments focused on optimization of existing capabilities rather than radical departures from established norms. He investigated methods for enhancing the efficiency of the Becher's gland, allowing for more potent acid production. He developed techniques for improving the responsiveness of the oculobe, granting sharper visual acuity under extreme conditions. His modifications to the hemastamen resulted in more efficient blood oxygenation, improving endurance during extended combat operations. These incremental improvements aligned perfectly with the Emperor's children's pursuit of perfection. Each enhancement brought the Legion's warriors closer to the ideal of post-human excellence that defined their identity. Bile's work represented not deviation from the Legion's principles, but their ultimate expression through scientific advancement. The relationship between Fabius Bile and his Primarch, Fulgrim, developed within this context of shared dedication to perfection. Fulgrim embodied everything the Legion aspired to achieve: physical beauty, martial prowess, artistic sensibility, and intellectual sophistication combined in perfect harmony. For Bile, the Primarch represented the ultimate expression of genetic engineering, a being whose very existence proved that the boundaries of human potential could be transcended through careful application of scientific principles. Fulgrim, for his part, recognized in his chief apothecary a kindred spirit who shared his commitment to excellence. Where other Legion officers might view Bile's experiments with suspicion or concern, the Primarch saw them as natural extensions of the Legion's core mission. The pursuit of perfection demanded constant innovation, constant refinement of existing capabilities. Bile's work in the Apothecarian served this greater purpose by ensuring that each generation of Emperor's children surpassed the last. Their professional relationship was characterized by mutual respect and shared vision rather than personal intimacy. Fulgrim maintained appropriate distance from all his subordinates, but he made exceptions for those whose contributions proved particularly valuable to the Legion's mission. Bile's innovations in gene seed cultivation and enhancement procedures earned him regular access to the Primarch's Council and the privilege of presenting his research directly to Legion Command. This standing within the hierarchy granted Bile resources and authority that few apothecaries in other legions could match. His requests for experimental subjects were approved without question. His proposals for new research initiatives received immediate funding and support. The laboratories under his command expanded to accommodate increasingly ambitious projects. The scope of his investigations broadened to encompass not merely the optimization of existing Astartes capabilities, but the exploration of entirely new possibilities for human enhancement. The Emperor's children's culture of perfectionism created an environment where such ambitious research could flourish. Other legions might have viewed radical experimentation with suspicion, but the Third Legion understood that true excellence required pushing beyond established boundaries. Bile's work represented the scientific expression of principles that the entire Legion held sacred. His reputation extended beyond the confines of his own Legion, as reports of his innovations spread throughout the apothecarian networks of other Space Marine forces. Fellow chief apothecaries sought his collaboration on particularly challenging cases. The techniques he developed were adapted and implemented across multiple legions, improving the overall effectiveness of the Astartes as a whole. This period of his career established patterns of thought and methodology that would persist throughout his long existence. The clinical detachment with which he approached biological systems, the willingness to push beyond conventional limitations, the view of living organisms as complex machines that could be improved through careful modification. All of these characteristics emerged during his service as chief apothecary of the Emperor's children. The resources at his disposal during this period were unprecedented. The Great Crusade's expansion provided access to countless worlds with unique biological systems and evolutionary adaptations. Alien species encountered during compliance operations offered insights into alternative approaches to biological organization. The vast genetic diversity of humanity itself, spread across thousands of worlds and exposed to countless environmental pressures, presented endless opportunities for study and experimentation. Bile approached this wealth of biological material with systematic thoroughness. His research protocols established comprehensive cataloging systems for genetic samples. His experimental procedures followed rigorous scientific methodologies designed to produce reproducible results. His documentation practices created detailed records that would prove invaluable for future research initiatives. The scope of his investigations during this period encompassed every aspect of Astartes biology and beyond. He studied the interaction between gene seed implants and host physiology with unprecedented precision. He investigated the mechanisms that govern the remarkable healing capabilities of space marines. He explored the biochemical foundations of their enhanced strength, speed, and endurance. Each discovery led to new questions, new avenues for investigation, new possibilities for improvement. The trajectory of Fabius Bile's transformation from loyal servant of the Emperor to heretical architect of genetic abomination began with events that seemed, at first glance, to represent the very pinnacle of the Great Crusade's success. The Emperor's children had achieved a level of martial excellence that few other legions could match, their pursuit of perfection having yielded warriors of extraordinary capability and discipline. Yet it was precisely this drive toward transcendence that would ultimately lead them into the embrace of powers far more ancient and malevolent than any they had previously encountered. The campaign against the Lair civilization represented a seemingly routine compliance action, one of countless such operations that had brought entire star systems under Imperial rule. The Lair themselves presented an intriguing case study for the Legion's xenobiologists and tactical analysts. These serpentine beings had developed a sophisticated civilization based on aesthetic principles that bore superficial similarities to the Emperor's children's own cultural values. Their cities displayed architectural beauty that impressed even the Legion's most discerning observers, while their military formations demonstrated tactical sophistication that demanded careful study. What distinguished the Lair from other Xeno species encountered during the Great Crusade was their apparent understanding of perfection as both physical and spiritual concept. Their warriors moved with fluid grace that transcended mere mechanical precision, suggesting an integration of form and function that approached the ideal the Emperor's children sought to achieve. Their weapons and armor displayed craftsmanship that combined practical effectiveness with artistic beauty in ways that resonated with the Legion's aesthetic sensibilities. Fabius Bile observed these characteristics with his customary clinical interest, but his focus remained primarily on the biological aspects of Lair physiology. Their serpentine forms represented an evolutionary pathway entirely different from human development, yet they had achieved levels of sensory acuity and physical coordination that surpassed baseline human capabilities in several key areas. The structure of their nervous systems suggested processing speeds that might exceed even Astartes' reaction times under certain conditions. The campaign itself proceeded according to established protocols, with the Emperor's children demonstrating their characteristic precision and tactical excellence. Yet something about the Lair resistance patterns suggested capabilities that standard intelligence assessments had failed to identify. Their warriors fought with an intensity that seemed to transcend mere defensive instincts, displaying levels of coordination and tactical awareness that implied forms of communication or sensory perception beyond conventional understanding. Fulgrim himself led the final assault on the primary lair temple fortress, a structure that combined military functionality with architectural grandeur in ways that captured the Primarch's aesthetic appreciation. The building's design incorporated flowing curves and organic shapes that seemed to pulse with subtle energy, creating visual effects that proved both beautiful and somehow disturbing to observe. The materials used in its construction displayed properties that defied easy categorization, combining metallic strength with organic flexibility in ways that suggested advanced understanding of materials science. Within the temple's innermost sanctum, the Primarch discovered artifacts that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of his legion's development. Among these was a blade of clearly Xeno's manufacture, its design incorporating aesthetic elements that spoke to Fulgrim's artistic sensibilities while displaying craftsmanship that exceeded anything in the Legion's armories. The weapon's edge held a sharpness that seemed to cut through more than mere physical matter, while its surface displayed patterns that shifted and flowed in response to ambient light conditions. The blade's discovery represented a moment of decision that would echo throughout the subsequent history of the Emperor's children. Standard protocols demanded that Xeno's artifacts be subjected to extensive testing and analysis before any consideration of practical application. The risks associated with alien technology were well documented, ranging from simple mechanical failure to more exotic dangers involving psychic contamination or technological incompatibility with Imperial systems. Yet the weapon's obvious quality and the aesthetic appeal of its design created a powerful temptation for a Primarch whose entire existence was dedicated to the pursuit of perfection. The blade represented not merely a tool of war, but a work of art that embodied principles of beauty and functionality in perfect harmony. Its very existence suggested possibilities for transcendence that aligned with the Legion's core mission, while offering capabilities that might enhance their effectiveness in future campaigns. Fulgrim's decision to claim the blade for his personal use marked the beginning of changes that would initially appear subtle, but would gradually accelerate into fundamental transformation. The weapon's influence operated through mechanisms that remained invisible to conventional observation, working through pathways that bypass the conscious mind to affect deeper levels of personality and perception. The Primarch's behavior patterns began to shift in ways that his subordinates initially interpreted as natural evolution of his leadership style. Fabius Bile, observing these changes through his position as chief apothecary, noted alterations in the Primarch's physiological responses that suggested exposure to unknown stimuli. Fulgrim's neural activity patterns displayed variations from established baselines that indicated heightened sensory processing and accelerated cognitive function. His physical coordination improved beyond even his previous superhuman capabilities, while his artistic sensibilities seemed to develop new dimensions of sophistication and complexity. These observations aligned with Bile's own research into the enhancement of Astartes' capabilities, suggesting that the Primarch had discovered methods for transcending the limitations that constrained even post-human physiology. The apparent improvements in Fulgrim's performance created powerful incentives for investigation and potential replication. If techniques existed that could enhance even a Primarch's already extraordinary capabilities, the implications for the Legion as a whole were profound. The gradual shift in the Emperor's children's operational methods reflected these underlying changes in their command structure. Combat doctrines that had previously emphasized disciplined precision began to incorporate elements of creative improvisation that pushed beyond established tactical frameworks. Training regimens expanded to include practices that focused on sensory enhancement and perceptual refinement rather than purely physical conditioning. The Legion's pursuit of perfection acquired new dimensions that encompassed experiences and sensations previously considered irrelevant to military effectiveness. Bile's own research during this period began to reflect these evolving priorities. His investigations into gene seed enhancement expanded to encompass neurological modifications that might improve sensory acuity and cognitive processing speed. His experimental protocols incorporated techniques for stimulating neural plasticity that could accelerate learning and adaptation. The scope of his work broadened to include studies of consciousness itself, exploring the mechanisms that governed perception and experience in ways that conventional imperial science had barely begun to address. The resources available for these investigations expanded significantly as the Legion's operational success continued to generate support from higher command levels. The Emperor's children's reputation for excellence ensured that their requests for specialized equipment and research materials received priority consideration. Bile's laboratories gained access to xenobiological samples from dozens of species, each offering insights into alternative approaches to biological organization and neural function. His experimental subjects during this period included not only willing volunteers from within the Legion, but also prisoners taken during compliance operations and specimens acquired through various other channels. The ethical frameworks that had previously governed such research began to shift as the pursuit of perfection demanded exploration of territories that conventional moral systems might consider questionable. The potential benefits of enhanced capabilities justified investigative methods that pushed beyond traditional boundaries of acceptable scientific practice. The transformation of these research priorities occurred gradually enough that individual changes seemed reasonable when considered in isolation. Each expansion of experimental scope appeared logical as a natural extension of previous work. Each relaxation of ethical constraints seemed justified by the potential for breakthrough discoveries that could benefit the entire Legion. The cumulative effect of these incremental shifts created research programs that bore little resemblance to the conservative enhancement work that had characterized Bile's earlier career. The Legion's encounters with increasingly exotic alien species provided opportunities for studying biological systems that operated according to principles entirely foreign to human understanding. Some species displayed regenerative capabilities that exceeded even Astartes' healing factors. Others demonstrated sensory organs that could perceive electromagnetic spectra invisible to human vision. The diversity of evolutionary solutions to survival challenges offered insights into possibilities that conventional imperial science had never considered. Bile's analysis of these xenobiological systems revealed mechanisms that could potentially be adapted for human enhancement through careful genetic modification. The integration of alien biological principles with existing Astartes physiology presented technical challenges that demanded innovative approaches to gene seed cultivation and implantation procedures. Success in these endeavors could yield capabilities that would represent genuine transcendence of human limitations rather than mere optimization of existing systems. The philosophical implications of such work aligned perfectly with the Emperor's children's evolving understanding of their mission. If perfection represented the ultimate goal of human development, then the achievement of that perfection might require incorporation of the best features discovered throughout the galaxy's biological diversity. The artificial constraints imposed by adherence to purely human genetic templates could be viewed as obstacles to true transcendence rather than necessary safeguards against corruption. These developing research programs required increasing levels of secrecy as their scope expanded beyond what conventional imperial doctrine might consider acceptable. The techniques being investigated pushed beyond established protocols for gene seed modification in ways that might generate concern among other Legion command structures. The experimental subjects being utilized included categories of beings whose use in such research would require careful justification to outside observers. The establishment of secure research facilities on worlds distant from major imperial installations provided the isolation necessary for conducting investigations that demanded absolute confidentiality. These laboratories incorporated security measures designed to prevent unauthorized access while maintaining the specialized environmental conditions required for advanced biological research. The staff assigned to these facilities underwent extensive conditioning to ensure absolute loyalty and discretion regarding the work being conducted. The scope of experimentation during this period encompassed every aspect of biological function that might be enhanced through genetic modification or surgical intervention. Neural processing speed, sensory acuity, physical strength, regenerative capacity, psychological resilience, and dozens of other characteristics became subjects for systematic investigation and improvement. Each successful enhancement opened new avenues for further research while demonstrating the validity of approaches that conventional imperial science might consider heretical. The results of these investigations began to manifest in subtle improvements to Legion combat effectiveness that reinforced the validity of the research programs. Individual Astartes who had undergone experimental enhancement procedures displayed capabilities that exceeded their unmodified battle brothers in measurable ways. Their reaction times improved, their sensory awareness expanded, their ability to process complex tactical information accelerated. These improvements translated directly into battlefield advantages that validated the continuation and expansion of the research efforts. The integration of these enhanced warriors into standard Legion formations created opportunities for studying the practical applications of the enhancement techniques under combat conditions. Their performance in actual engagements provided data that could be used to refine the procedures and develop new approaches to capability improvement. The feedback loop between research and application accelerated the pace of discovery while ensuring that theoretical advances translated into practical military advantages. As the Great Crusade approached its final phases, the Emperor's children had evolved into a force that bore only superficial resemblance to their original incarnation. Their pursuit of perfection had led them into territories of experience and capability that transcended the boundaries established by conventional imperial doctrine. The changes that had transformed them operated at levels too fundamental to be easily detected by outside observers, yet they represented a complete revolution in the Legion's understanding of their purpose and potential. The stage was thus set for the events that would culminate in the Istvan system, where the true extent of these transformations would be revealed through actions that would shatter the foundations of the Imperium itself. The corruption that had taken root within the Emperor's children during their pursuit of perfection had prepared them for betrayals that would have been unthinkable to their earlier selves, while the enhancements that Bile had developed would prove instrumental in the atrocities that followed. The betrayal at Istvan had shattered the foundations of Imperial unity, but it was during the long march toward Terra that Fabius Bile truly began to comprehend the scope of possibilities that his new allegiances had opened. The Emperor's children, now fully committed to their pursuit of sensation and perfection through chaos, found themselves operating in an environment where previous ethical constraints no longer applied. The war against the Imperium provided unlimited opportunities for experimentation on both willing and unwilling subjects, while the patronage of Slaanesh offered insights into biological enhancement that transcended anything achievable through conventional science. The journey through the warp toward the Sol system exposed Bile to phenomena that fundamentally altered his understanding of biological systems and their potential for modification. The Immaterium's influence on living tissue operated according to principles that defied conventional physics, allowing for transformations that should have been impossible under normal circumstances. Exposure to chaos energies could accelerate cellular regeneration, enhance neural processing capacity, or trigger mutations that granted entirely new capabilities. These effects provided a vast new field of study for someone with Bile's expertise and ambitions. His mobile laboratories aboard the Legion's fleet became centers of frenzied activity as he worked to catalog and understand the changes occurring within his battle brothers. The influence of Slaanesh manifested differently in each individual, creating a diverse array of enhancements and modifications that defied systematic classification. Some warriors developed heightened sensory organs that could perceive spectra of experience invisible to unenhanced humans. Others underwent physical transformations that improved their combat effectiveness, while altering their appearance in ways that reflected their patron deity's aesthetic preferences. The systematic study of these transformations required experimental controls that conventional imperial science would have considered abhorrent. Bile began conducting parallel experiments on captured loyalist Astartes, using them as baseline subjects against which to measure the effects of chaos corruption on enhanced human physiology. These prisoners, taken during various engagements throughout the heresy, provided invaluable data on the mechanisms through which warp exposure affected gene seed implants and the complex biological systems that supported Astartes' capabilities. The results of these comparative studies revealed fundamental differences in how chaos energies interacted with corrupted versus uncorrupted subjects. Loyalist Astartes displayed resistance to warp-induced mutations that seemed to stem from psychological factors as much as biological ones. Their continued faith in the Emperor appeared to provide some measure of protection against the more extreme forms of transformation, while their adherence to imperial doctrine created mental barriers that limited the scope of possible changes. By contrast, the Emperor's children who had embraced their new allegiances showed remarkable plasticity in response to chaos influence. Their willingness to abandon previous limitations allowed for transformations that enhanced their capabilities in ways that pure genetic engineering could never achieve. The symbiotic relationship between conscious acceptance of change and biological adaptation suggested mechanisms of enhancement that operated through pathways connecting mind, body, and soul in unprecedented ways. These discoveries led Bile to develop new experimental protocols that combined traditional gene seed manipulation with techniques designed to expose subjects to controlled doses of warp energy. The process required careful calibration to avoid the complete dissolution of biological coherence that characterized failed mutations, while ensuring sufficient exposure to trigger the desired enhancements. Success rates remained low during the early phases of this research, but the results achieved with successful subjects demonstrated capabilities that justified continued investigation. The approach to Terra itself provided opportunities for field testing these new enhancement techniques under combat conditions. The Emperor's children participated in numerous engagements throughout the outer system, each battle offering chances to evaluate the performance of enhanced warriors against loyalist forces. The data gathered from these encounters informed refinements to the enhancement procedures while demonstrating their practical military value. The diversity of Imperial forces encountered during the advance toward Terra presented Bile with access to genetic material from dozens of different Space Marine legions, each offering unique insights into alternative approaches to Astartes' enhancement. The gene seed of the Imperial Fists displayed characteristics that enhanced defensive capabilities and structural resilience. The Blood Angels showed genetic markers associated with enhanced aggression and combat effectiveness. The White Scars possessed modifications that improved speed and coordination in ways that differed significantly from standard Astartes templates. Bile's analysis of these various gene seed lineages revealed the extent to which the Emperor's original genetic engineering had been tailored to produce specific characteristics in each legion. The differences went far beyond superficial variations in appearance or temperament, extending to fundamental aspects of cellular structure and metabolic function. Understanding these variations provided insights into the mechanisms through which genetic modification could be used to enhance human capabilities in targeted ways. The integration of captured gene seed samples with his ongoing research into chaos-enhanced biology created possibilities for hybrid enhancement techniques that combine the best features of different Legion templates with the transformative power of warp exposure. These experiments required extensive testing to identify compatible combinations while avoiding genetic incompatibilities that could prove fatal to test subjects. The process demanded patience and systematic methodology, but the potential results justified the investment of time and resources. As the Traitor Legions established their siege lines around Terra, Bile found himself with access to an unprecedented variety of experimental subjects. The civilian populations of conquered worlds provided baseline human specimens for testing enhancement procedures that might later be applied to Astartes subjects. The diversity of human genetic variation across the galaxy offered insights into the fundamental mechanisms that governed biological adaptation and modification. His experiments on civilian populations during this period focused on identifying the limits of human physiological plasticity when exposed to various forms of genetic modification and chaos influence. The results varied dramatically based on factors including age, genetic background, psychological conditioning, and previous exposure to warp energies. Some subjects displayed remarkable adaptability, undergoing transformations that granted superhuman capabilities while maintaining essential biological coherence. Others proved unable to survive even minor modifications, their systems failing catastrophically when pushed beyond natural limitations. The systematic documentation of these experimental results created a comprehensive database of information regarding human enhancement potential that would prove invaluable for future research efforts. The data revealed patterns and correlations that suggested optimal approaches for different types of subjects, while identifying risk factors that could predict likely outcomes for various enhancement procedures. This knowledge base represented years of intensive research compressed into the accelerated timeframe that warfare provided. The siege itself offered unique opportunities for studying the effects of extreme stress on enhanced biological systems. The prolonged combat operations, exposure to exotic weapons, and psychological pressure of fighting against former allies created conditions that tested the resilience of modified physiology in ways that laboratory environments could never replicate. The performance data gathered from enhanced warriors during actual combat provided crucial feedback for refining enhancement procedures and developing new approaches to capability improvement. The breaching of Terra's outer defenses brought Bile into contact with the most sophisticated Imperial military technology and the most elite loyalist forces. The Adeptus Custodes, in particular, represented a form of human enhancement that differed significantly from standard Astartes modifications. Their creation process involved individual genetic crafting rather than mass production techniques, resulting in capabilities that exceeded even Primarch-level performance in certain areas. The opportunity to study custodian physiology, even through combat encounters and recovered remains, provided insights into enhancement techniques that the Emperor had reserved for his most elite guardians. The Imperial Palace itself contained research facilities and genetic laboratories that had been sealed since the early days of the Great Crusade. Access to these installations, even briefly during the chaos of battle, allowed Bile to recover samples and data that illuminated aspects of the Emperor's original enhancement programs. The techniques revealed through this captured information suggested approaches to genetic modification that operated on principles fundamentally different from those employed in standard Astartes creation. The knowledge gained from these Imperial research facilities indicated that the Emperor's understanding of human enhancement had encompassed possibilities far beyond what had been implemented in the Space Marine Legions. The Primarch creation process represented only one application of genetic engineering techniques that could theoretically be adapted for other purposes. The implications of this discovery suggested that the limitations Bile had previously accepted as fundamental constraints were actually artificial boundaries imposed by incomplete understanding of the underlying science. Throughout the siege, his mobile laboratories continued operating despite the chaos of constant warfare. The facilities were relocated frequently to avoid destruction by loyalist counterattacks, while maintaining the specialized environmental conditions required for advanced biological research. The staff of these laboratories included both willing volunteers from among the Emperor's children and conscripted specialists captured during various operations. Their combined expertise enabled continuation of research programs even under the extreme conditions of active combat. The climactic assault on the Imperial Palace provided access to the most heavily defended areas of Terra, including installations that contain the Emperor's most sensitive research projects. The brief period during which traitor forces held portions of the palace allowed for recovery of genetic samples and research data that had been sealed away since the earliest days of Imperial expansion. These materials included specimens from the Primarch creation process itself, offering unprecedented insights into the techniques used to craft beings of such extraordinary capability. The Emperor's defeat of Horus and the subsequent collapse of the traitor assault came at a moment when Bile's research had reached critical breakthroughs in understanding the mechanisms that govern superhuman enhancement. The data recovered from Imperial facilities, combined with years of experimentation on various subjects, had revealed principles that could theoretically be applied to create beings that surpassed even Primarch-level capabilities. The retreat from Terra meant abandoning much of the specialized equipment that had made these discoveries possible, but the knowledge itself remained intact. The withdrawal to the Eye of Terror represented both an ending and a beginning for Bile's research programs. The loss of access to Imperial resources and facilities meant that future work would need to rely on whatever could be established within the warp-touched regions that would become the Traitor Legion's new home. Yet the Eye of Terror itself offered possibilities for enhancement research that normal space could never provide. The constant exposure to chaos energies created an environment where biological systems could be pushed far beyond their usual limitations. The establishment of his first major, post-heresy laboratories on demon worlds within the Eye required adaptation to environmental conditions that defied conventional understanding of biological science. The fundamental laws of physics operated differently in these warp-saturated regions, allowing for experimental procedures that would be impossible under normal circumstances. The very atmosphere of these worlds contained energies that could trigger spontaneous mutations or enhance the effects of genetic modification procedures. The demon worlds chosen for these research facilities offered unique advantages for different types of experimentation. Some provided access to exotic materials that could be incorporated into biological systems to grant supernatural capabilities. Others featured environmental conditions that accelerated evolutionary processes, allowing for rapid testing of genetic modifications that would require generations to evaluate under normal circumstances. The diversity of available research environments enabled parallel investigation of multiple enhancement approaches simultaneously. The transition from wartime experimentation to systematic research programs required reorganization of priorities and methodologies that had been developed during the heresy. The urgent demands of active combat had necessitated focus on immediate practical applications rather than long-term theoretical development. The relative stability of the Eye of Terror environment allowed for return to more methodical approaches that could explore the fundamental principles underlying the enhancement techniques that had been discovered through trial and error during the war. The early post-heresy period saw Bile beginning to develop the theoretical frameworks that would guide his research for millennia to come. The concept of biological perfection as an achievable goal through systematic genetic modification became the central organizing principle around which all other research activities were structured. This vision of perfection encompassed not merely the optimization of existing human capabilities, but the transcendence of human limitations through incorporation of the best features discovered throughout the galaxy's biological diversity. The establishment of permanent research facilities within the Eye of Terror marked a fundamental shift in Fabius Bile's approach to biological enhancement, moving beyond the opportunistic experimentation of the heresy years toward a systematic methodology guided by philosophical principles that would define his work for millennia. The demon worlds of the Eye provided an environment where the conventional limitations of Imperial science no longer applied, yet Bile found himself increasingly skeptical of the very chaos powers that had enabled his escape from Terra's constraints. His observations of the mutations and transformations affecting his fellow emperor's children revealed patterns that suggested external manipulation rather than genuine evolutionary advancement. The warp-touched nature of his new laboratories created conditions where biological systems responded to stimuli in ways that defied rational explanation. Cellular regeneration occurred at rates that violated known metabolic constraints. Neural tissue developed new structures that enabled perception of electromagnetic spectra invisible to baseline human senses. Muscular systems achieved strength to mass ratios that should have been impossible under normal physical laws. Yet these enhancements came with dependencies on chaos energies that Bile increasingly viewed as fundamental flaws rather than acceptable trade-offs. His systematic analysis of chaos-enhanced subjects revealed deterioration patterns that became apparent only through long-term observation. Warriors who had initially displayed remarkable improvements in combat effectiveness began experiencing progressive degradation of cognitive function. Enhanced sensory organs that had granted supernatural perception gradually became sources of constant agony as they detected stimuli that the nervous system could not properly process. Physical modifications that had improved strength and resilience eventually led to structural instabilities that threatened the subject's survival. These observations led Bile to question the fundamental assumptions underlying chaos-based enhancement techniques. The improvements achieved through warp exposure appeared to represent temporary optimization rather than permanent evolutionary advancement. The subjects became increasingly dependent on continued exposure to chaos energies to maintain their enhanced capabilities, creating a form of biological addiction that compromised their autonomy and long-term viability. The pattern suggested that chaos enhancement was ultimately parasitic rather than symbiotic in nature. The recognition of these limitations coincided with Bile's growing exposure to xenobiological specimens that demonstrated alternative approaches to biological optimization. The Eye of Terror's chaotic nature occasionally deposited artifacts and creatures from across the galaxy, providing access to evolutionary solutions that had developed without chaos influence. These specimens displayed enhancements that appeared stable over extended periods, without requiring external energy sources or creating psychological dependencies. The study of these naturally evolved enhancements revealed principles of biological organization that operated independently of warp influence. Certain species had developed regenerative capabilities that exceeded chaos-enhanced healing factors while maintaining perfect biological coherence across multiple generations. Others displayed sensory organs that provided expanded perception without the psychological instabilities that characterized warp-touched modifications. The existence of these naturally occurring enhancements suggested that biological perfection could be achieved through purely scientific means. This realization catalyzed the development of Bile's New Men philosophy, a comprehensive theoretical framework that rejected both the limitations of baseline humanity and the corrupting influence of chaos enhancement. The concept envisioned the creation of a superior human subspecies that would combine the best features of natural evolution with carefully designed genetic modifications. These enhanced beings would possess capabilities that exceeded both unmodified humans and chaos-corrupted subjects, while maintaining perfect biological stability and psychological coherence. The philosophical foundations of the New Men concept drew upon Bile's extensive observations of human genetic variation across the galaxy. His research during the Great Crusade had revealed the remarkable adaptability of human physiology when exposed to different environmental pressures. Populations that had developed on high-gravity worlds displayed enhanced muscular and skeletal systems. Those from radiation-rich environments had evolved improved cellular repair mechanisms. Communities exposed to specific atmospheric compositions had developed respiratory adaptations that improved oxygen processing efficiency. These naturally occurring variations demonstrated that human genetic templates contained vast untapped potential for enhancement that could be accessed through careful manipulation of developmental processes. The techniques used to create space marines represented only the most basic application of genetic modification principles that could theoretically be extended far beyond their current limitations. The creation of Primarchs had proven that human genetic material could support capabilities that approached the supernatural when properly modified and enhanced. The New Men philosophy proposed systematic application of these enhancement principles to create beings that would represent the next stage of human evolution. Unlike the random mutations produced by chaos exposure, these modifications would be precisely designed to achieve specific improvements while maintaining perfect biological integration. The resulting subspecies would possess enhanced physical capabilities, expanded sensory perception, improved cognitive function, and extended lifespans without the instabilities and dependencies that characterized other enhancement approaches. The implementation of this vision required development of new methodologies that combined traditional apothecary knowledge with insights gained from xenobiological research and controlled exposure to warp phenomena. Bile's approach integrated gene seed cultivation techniques with genetic modification procedures derived from the study of naturally evolved enhancements. The process involved careful analysis of target subjects to identify optimal modification pathways while avoiding combinations that might create biological incompatibilities. The xenobiological component of his methodology drew upon specimens collected from across the galaxy during the Great Crusade and subsequent operations within the Eye of Terror. Each species studied provided insights into alternative solutions to biological challenges that human evolution had addressed differently or not at all. The regenerative capabilities of certain reptilian species could potentially be integrated with human cellular repair mechanisms to create enhanced healing factors. The sensory organs of deep space organisms might be adapted to grant humans perception of electromagnetic spectra currently invisible to them. The integration of alien biological principles with human physiology required extensive testing to identify compatible combinations while avoiding rejection responses that could prove fatal. Bile's experimental protocols involved systematic evaluation of individual genetic modifications before attempting complex multi-system enhancements. Each successful integration provided data that informed subsequent experiments while expanding the range of possible modifications that could be safely applied to human subjects. The warp-touched sciences component of his methodology represented the most controversial aspect of the New Men philosophy. While rejecting the corrupting influence of chaos worship, Bile recognized that controlled exposure to warp energies could trigger beneficial mutations when properly managed. The key lay in limiting exposure duration and intensity to levels that produced desired enhancements without creating dependencies or psychological instabilities. This approach required precise understanding of the mechanisms through which warp energies affected biological systems. His research into these mechanisms revealed that chaos corruption occurred primarily through psychological pathways that created feedback loops between conscious acceptance of change and biological transformation. Subjects who embraced chaos influence experienced accelerated mutation rates that quickly exceeded their biological system's ability to maintain coherence. By contrast, exposure protocols that maintained psychological barriers against chaos influence could trigger beneficial mutations while preventing the progressive degradation associated with full corruption. The development of these controlled exposure techniques required extensive experimentation on subjects drawn from various sources. Captured Imperial forces provided baseline data on uncorrupted human responses to warp energy exposure. Willing volunteers from among the Emperor's children offered insights into the effects of controlled exposure on already enhanced subjects. Civilian populations acquired during various raids supplied test subjects for evaluating modification procedures on baseline human physiology. The establishment of his mobile laboratory represented a crucial component of the New Men research program, providing the specialized facilities necessary for conducting advanced genetic modification procedures while maintaining the flexibility to relocate as circumstances required. the laboratory incorporated equipment salvaged from Imperial research installations, with devices of his own design that had been adapted for the unique environmental conditions of the Eye of Terror. The facility's modular construction allowed for rapid deployment and reconfiguration to accommodate different types of experimental procedures. The mobile laboratory's design reflected Bile's systematic approach to biological research, with specialized sections dedicated to different aspects of the enhancement process. Gene seed cultivation chambers maintain the precise environmental conditions required for modifying Astartes' genetic material. Surgical suites provided sterile environments for implantation procedures and other invasive modifications. Observation areas allowed for long-term monitoring of subjects undergoing experimental treatments. Storage facilities preserved genetic samples and xenobiological specimens under conditions that prevented degradation or contamination. The recruitment of disciples and assistants for these research programs required identification of individuals who possessed both the technical competence necessary for advanced biological work and the philosophical commitment to the new men vision. Bile sought candidates among the Emperor's children who had demonstrated aptitude for scientific investigation while maintaining sufficient intellectual independence to question established doctrines. The selection process emphasized analytical thinking and experimental methodology over blind loyalty or religious fervor. The training of these disciples involved comprehensive education in genetic modification techniques, xenobiological analysis, and controlled warp exposure protocols. Each student was required to demonstrate mastery of fundamental principles before being permitted to participate in actual enhancement procedures. The curriculum included extensive study of failed experiments and their causes, ensuring that future researchers would understand the risks associated with different modification approaches and the importance of maintaining rigorous safety protocols. The acquisition of test subjects for the New Men research program utilized multiple recruitment strategies that reflected the realities of operating within the Eye of Terror. Willing volunteers from among the Emperor's children provided subjects who understood the experimental nature of the procedures and accepted the associated risks. Captured enemies offered opportunities to test enhancement techniques on unwilling subjects without concern for their consent or survival. Civilian populations encountered during raids supplied baseline human specimens for evaluating the effects of various modifications on unenhanced physiology. The systematic documentation of experimental results created a comprehensive database of information regarding human enhancement potential that would guide future research efforts. Each procedure was meticulously recorded, including subject characteristics, modification techniques employed, observed effects, and long-term outcomes. This data revealed patterns and correlations that informed the development of improved enhancement protocols, while identifying risk factors that could predict likely success rates for different types of subjects. The early results of the New Men research program demonstrated the validity of Bile's philosophical approach while revealing the technical challenges involved in achieving his vision. Successful subjects displayed enhanced capabilities that exceeded both baseline human performance and many forms of chaos enhancement while maintaining perfect biological stability. Their physical strength, sensory acuity, cognitive function, and regenerative capacity all showed measurable improvements that persisted over extended periods without requiring external support or creating psychological dependencies. However, the complexity of the enhancement procedures meant that success rates remained relatively low during the initial phases of the research program. The integration of multiple genetic modifications required precise calibration to avoid biological incompatibilities that could prove fatal. The controlled exposure to warp energies demanded careful monitoring to prevent corruption while ensuring sufficient stimulation to trigger desired mutations. The overall process required resources and expertise that limited the number of subjects who could undergo enhancement at any given time. These limitations led Bile to focus on developing more efficient enhancement techniques that could be applied to larger numbers of subjects, while maintaining the quality standards established by the New Men philosophy. The research emphasized identification of key genetic modifications that provided the greatest improvements with the lowest risk of complications. Streamlined procedures were developed that reduced the time and resources required for each enhancement, while preserving the essential elements that distinguished New Men from other forms of human modification. The establishment of recruitment networks throughout the Eye of Terror provided access to the diverse subject populations necessary for comprehensive testing of enhancement procedures. These networks identified potential disciples among the various Chaos Space Marine warbands, while locating sources of test subjects from Imperial forces and civilian populations. The systematic approach to recruitment ensured steady supplies of both willing volunteers and unwilling subjects for the ongoing research programs. The development of recruitment networks throughout the Eye of Terror had provided Bile with the foundation necessary for his most ambitious project yet, the systematic perfection of cloning technology that would grant him effective immortality while serving as the cornerstone for mass production of his new men. The philosophical framework he had established demanded practical implementation on a scale that traditional enhancement procedures could never achieve, requiring techniques that could replicate successful modifications across thousands of subjects without the resource constraints that limited individual treatments. His initial investigations into cloning technology had begun during the later stages of the heresy, when access to Imperial research facilities had provided glimpses of the Emperor's own work in creating multiple iterations of genetic templates. The Primarch creation process itself had involved extensive experimentation with cloning techniques, though the final products had been unique individuals rather than identical copies. The underlying principles revealed through captured Imperial data suggested that perfect biological replication was theoretically achievable through sufficiently advanced genetic manipulation and cellular cultivation methods. The practical challenges of implementing large-scale cloning operations within the Eye of Terror required adaptation of Imperial techniques to environmental conditions that bore little resemblance to the sterile laboratories of Terra. The constant warp exposure that characterized demon worlds created cellular instabilities that interfered with normal genetic replication processes. Spontaneous mutations occurred at rates that made maintaining genetic consistency across multiple clones extremely difficult. The very atmosphere of these worlds contained energies that could trigger unwanted modifications in developing embryonic tissue. Bile's solution to these environmental challenges involved the development of specialized cultivation chambers that could maintain stable biological conditions despite the chaotic nature of their surroundings. These devices incorporated force field generators that created isolated microenvironments where normal physical laws operated with sufficient consistency to support reliable cellular development. The chambers required constant monitoring and adjustment to compensate for fluctuations in local warp energy levels, but they provided the controlled conditions necessary for successful cloning operations. The genetic templates used for these cloning experiments drew upon the comprehensive database of enhancement modifications that his New Men research had produced. Rather than simply replicating baseline human genetics, Bile incorporated the most successful modifications directly into the cloning process itself. The resulting subjects emerged from their cultivation chambers already possessing enhanced capabilities that would have required extensive surgical procedures to achieve through traditional methods. This integration of enhancement and replication techniques represented a fundamental advancement in biological engineering that exceeded anything achieved during the Great Crusade. The first successful clones produced through these methods displayed capabilities that validated Bile's theoretical framework while revealing new possibilities for genetic manipulation. Their physical strength exceeded that of unenhanced humans by factors that approached Astartes levels without requiring gene seed implantation. Their sensory organs could perceive electromagnetic spectra invisible to baseline human vision while maintaining perfect psychological stability. their cellular repair mechanisms operated at rates that granted regenerative capabilities rivaling those of space marines. Most importantly, these enhancements appeared stable across multiple generations of cloning, suggesting that the modifications had been successfully integrated into the fundamental genetic structure. The implications of this success extended far beyond the creation of enhanced subjects for experimental purposes. The ability to produce genetically modified clones on an industrial scale opened possibilities for creating entire armies of new men who could serve as the foundation for a post-human civilization. Unlike the Emperor's children or other Chaos Space Marines, these clones would owe their existence entirely to Bile's scientific achievements rather than the corrupting influence of the warp. They represented the ultimate expression of his vision for humanity's evolutionary future. However, the most significant application of cloning technology lay in its potential for granting Bile himself effective immortality through the creation of backup bodies that could serve as vessels for his consciousness in the event of physical death. The concept of consciousness transfer had been explored by Imperial scientists during the Dark Age of technology, but the techniques had been lost during Old Night, along with most other advanced technologies. Bile's research into the mechanisms of memory storage and neural pattern replication suggested that these lost capabilities could be reconstructed through careful study of brain structure and function. The development of consciousness transfer techniques required understanding of neural networks at levels of detail that exceeded even the most advanced Imperial medical knowledge. Bile's investigations revealed that memory storage occurred through complex patterns of synaptic connections that could theoretically be mapped and replicated in artificial systems. The process of transferring these patterns from one brain to another presented technical challenges that demanded innovations in both neurosurgical technique and computational technology. His early experiments in consciousness transfer utilized subjects drawn from the various populations available within his research facilities. The procedure involved detailed scanning of neural structures to create comprehensive maps of synaptic patterns and memory engrams. This information was then used to guide surgical modifications of recipient brains, creating neural pathways that matched those of the donor subject. The process required extraordinary precision to avoid damaging existing brain tissue while ensuring proper integration of transferred memories. The initial results of these experiments demonstrated that basic memory transfer was achievable under carefully controlled conditions. Subjects who underwent the procedure displayed access to memories and skills that had belonged to the donor, though the integration was often incomplete and unstable. Personality characteristics proved more difficult to transfer than factual knowledge, suggesting that consciousness involved aspects of neural function that were not captured by simple synaptic mapping. The complexity of achieving perfect consciousness transfer would require years of additional research and refinement. The creation of his first backup clone body represented a crucial milestone in this research program. The clone was cultivated using Bile's own genetic template, modified to incorporate the most successful enhancements from his new men research. The resulting body possessed physical capabilities that exceeded his original form while maintaining perfect biological compatibility for consciousness transfer procedures. The clone's brain was surgically prepared with neural pathways designed to receive the complete contents of Bile's consciousness, creating a vessel that could theoretically support his continued existence even after the destruction of his original body. The consciousness transfer process itself required surgical procedures of unprecedented complexity and precision. Bile's original brain was connected to the clone's neural system through an intricate network of fiber optic cables and neural interfaces that allowed for direct transfer of electrical impulses between the two organs. The procedure took place over several days, with memories and personality patterns being gradually copied from the original to the duplicate brain. Constant monitoring ensured that the transfer process maintained perfect fidelity while avoiding damage to either neural system. The success of this first consciousness transfer validated the theoretical framework while revealing practical limitations that would require ongoing refinement. The the clone body successfully received Bile's memories and personality, creating a duplicate consciousness that possessed all of his knowledge and capabilities. However, the process was not perfectly seamless, with some memories showing slight degradation and certain personality traits appearing subtly altered. These imperfections suggested that consciousness transfer remained an imperfect science that would benefit from continued research and development. The establishment of multiple backup bodies became a priority following the success of the initial transfer experiment. Bile created a series of clone bodies that were maintained in stasis chambers throughout his various research facilities, each one prepared to receive his consciousness in the event of his original body's destruction. These backup systems were distributed across different locations to prevent their simultaneous destruction by enemy action or environmental catastrophe. The redundancy ensured that his research could continue even if individual facilities were compromised or destroyed. The integration of consciousness transfer technology with his broader cloning research opened new avenues for creating enhanced subjects who possessed not only superior physical capabilities, but also advanced knowledge and skills transferred from existing experts. The technique allowed for the rapid creation of specialists who combined enhanced biology with decades of accumulated experience and training. This approach could theoretically produce armies of new men who possessed both superhuman capabilities and expert-level competence in various fields of knowledge. The practical applications of this technology extended to his disciples and research assistants, who could be granted enhanced bodies while retaining their accumulated expertise and loyalty. The procedure created a cadre of enhanced followers who shared Bile's vision while possessing the capabilities necessary to implement it on a larger scale. These enhanced disciples served as field commanders and research directors for operations that required both scientific competence and superhuman physical capabilities. The systematic study of Primarch gene seed became a crucial component of Bile's cloning research as he sought to understand the fundamental principles underlying the Emperor's greatest genetic achievements. The Primarchs represented the pinnacle of human enhancement, beings whose capabilities exceeded even the most successful new men by orders of magnitude. Understanding the techniques used to create such extraordinary individuals could provide insights that would revolutionize his own enhancement methods. His access to Primarch genetic material had begun during the Heresy, when battlefield conditions had provided opportunities to recover tissue samples from both Loyalist and Traitor Primarchs. These specimens had been carefully preserved in specialized storage systems that maintained their genetic integrity despite the passage of millennia. The analysis of this material revealed genetic structures of extraordinary complexity that incorporated modifications far beyond anything achievable through conventional enhancement techniques. The Primarch gene seed displayed characteristics that suggested the Emperor had possessed understanding of genetic engineering principles that transcended normal scientific knowledge. The modifications incorporated into Primarch genetics operated through mechanisms that appeared to violate known biological laws, creating capabilities that bordered on the supernatural. The regenerative factors alone exceeded anything found in nature by factors that should have been impossible to achieve through purely biological means. Bile's attempts to replicate these modifications in his own cloning experiments met with limited success, revealing the extent to which Primarch creation had relied upon knowledge and techniques that remained beyond his current understanding. The genetic structures were too complex to reproduce accurately, while the underlying principles that governed their function remained largely mysterious. However, partial integration of Primarch genetic elements into his cloning templates produced subjects with capabilities that exceeded his previous achievements, suggesting that even incomplete understanding could yield significant improvements. The study of different Primarch lineages revealed variations in genetic structure that reflected the specialized characteristics of each legion. Fulgrim's gene seed contained modifications that enhanced sensory perception and aesthetic appreciation beyond normal human capabilities. Angron's genetic template included structures that amplified aggressive responses and pain tolerance to superhuman levels. Each Primarch's unique characteristics were encoded in genetic modifications that could theoretically be adapted for use in other subjects. The integration of Primarch genetic elements with his new men templates required extensive experimentation to identify compatible combinations, while avoiding genetic incompatibilities that could prove fatal. The complexity of Primarch genetics meant that even small modifications could have unpredictable effects on overall biological function. Success rates remained low, but the subjects who survived the enhancement process displayed capabilities that approached Primarch-level performance in specific areas. These experiments with Primarch gene seed led to the development of specialized cloning lines that incorporated different genetic modifications depending on their intended purpose. Combat-oriented clones received genetic elements that enhanced physical strength and combat reflexes. Research-focused subjects were modified with improvements to cognitive function and analytical capabilities. The ability to create specialized clones allowed for more efficient allocation of resources, while ensuring that each subject possessed optimal capabilities for their assigned role. The creation of enhanced human specimens through his refined cloning processes represented the ultimate expression of Bile's new men philosophy in practical form. These subjects combine the best features of natural human genetics with carefully selected modifications that granted superhuman capabilities without the instabilities associated with chaos enhancement. The cloning process allowed for mass production of these enhanced beings, creating the foundation for a post-human civilization that could eventually replace both baseline humanity and the corrupted space marines. The ongoing refinement of cloning processes focused on improving both the quality and efficiency of subject production. New cultivation techniques reduced the time required for clone development while improving the success rate of genetic modifications. Enhanced surgical procedures allowed for more complex modifications to be integrated during the cloning process itself, reducing the need for post-development enhancement procedures. The systematic optimization of these methods promised to make large-scale production of new men economically viable. The establishment of production facilities throughout the Eye of Terror created a network of cloning centers that could operate independently while sharing resources and expertise. Each facility specialized in different aspects of the cloning process, with some focusing on genetic template development, while others concentrated on mass production of finished subjects. The distributed nature of these operations provided redundancy against facility destruction, while allowing for specialization that improved overall efficiency. The recruitment of enhanced subjects from these cloning programs created the core of Bile's growing organization, providing him with followers who possessed both superhuman capabilities and absolute loyalty to his vision. Unlike the Emperor's children or other Chaos Space Marines, these clones owed their existence entirely to his scientific achievements rather than allegiance to any Chaos deity. Their loyalty was based on gratitude and shared purpose rather than religious fervor or corruption-induced madness. The establishment of Bile's cloning networks throughout the Eye of Terror had created unprecedented opportunities for expansion beyond the confines of his mobile laboratories, but the realization of his new men vision required resources and cooperation that no single individual could provide. The chaotic nature of the Eye's political landscape, where dozens of Chaos Space Marine warbands competed for territory and resources while pursuing their own agendas, presented both obstacles and opportunities for someone willing to navigate its treacherous currents with sufficient cunning and pragmatism. Unlike many of his former battle brothers who had embraced the worship of chaos deities with religious fervor, Bile maintained a carefully calculated neutrality that allowed him to work with virtually any faction when mutual benefit could be achieved. His reputation as the primogenitor had spread throughout the scattered remnants of the Traitor Legions, creating demand for his services among warlords who sought enhanced warriors, but lacked the expertise to create them independently. This demand provided leverage that he exploited ruthlessly, trading enhancement procedures and genetic modifications for the resources necessary to expand his research operations. The Iron Warriors proved among his most reliable clients during the early millennia following the heresy, their pragmatic approach to warfare creating natural alignment with his own methodical philosophy. Perdurabo's sons appreciated the tangible military advantages that Bile's enhancements could provide without requiring the spiritual corruption that other forms of chaos blessing demanded. Their fortress worlds within the Eye provided secure locations for establishing research facilities, while their extensive slave populations offered abundant test subjects for experimental procedures. The relationship with Iron Warriors warbands operated on strictly transactional terms that both parties found acceptable. Bile provided enhanced warriors whose capabilities exceeded standard Chaos Space Marines in specific areas, improved regenerative factors for siege warfare, enhanced sensory organs for tunnel fighting, modified respiratory systems for operations in toxic environments. In exchange, the Iron Warriors supplied raw materials for his laboratories, protected his research facilities from rival factions, and granted access to their extensive networks of human chattel for experimental purposes. These arrangements required careful negotiation to ensure that enhancement procedures aligned with Iron Warriors' tactical doctrine while advancing Bile's own research objectives. The modifications he provided were tailored to complement their preferred combat methods, creating warriors who could survive prolonged siege operations while serving as test subjects for techniques that might later be applied to his new men projects. The symbiotic relationship allowed both parties to achieve their goals without compromising their fundamental principles or long-term objectives. The word-bearers presented more complex challenges due to their fanatical devotion to chaos worship and their suspicion of anyone who refused to acknowledge the supremacy of the dark gods. However, certain factions within the Legion recognized the practical value of Bile's work despite their theological disagreements with his secular approach to enhancement. These pragmatic elements were willing to overlook his lack of religious fervor in exchange for access to genetic modifications that could strengthen their warriors for the long war against the Imperium. The negotiations with word-bearers required delicate handling of religious sensibilities while maintaining his own philosophical independence. Bile learned to frame his enhancement procedures in terms that emphasized their utility for serving chaos, without explicitly endorsing any particular deity or doctrine. The modifications he provided often incorporated aesthetic elements that satisfied word-bearer expectations for chaos-touched appearance, while achieving practical improvements in combat effectiveness that justified the theological compromises involved. The Alpha Legion's secretive nature and complex operational methods created opportunities for collaboration that operated through intermediaries and shell organizations rather than direct contact. Their preference for infiltration and manipulation over direct confrontation aligned well with Bile's need for discreet acquisition of Imperial genetic samples and research materials. Alpha Legion operatives could provide access to Loyalist Space Marine gene seed, captured Imperial technology, and intelligence regarding Imperium research facilities that might contain valuable specimens. These relationships with Alpha Legion elements operated through carefully compartmentalized networks that protected both parties from exposure while facilitating mutually beneficial exchanges. Bile provided enhanced infiltrators whose modifications allowed them to pass Imperial medical screening while retaining superhuman capabilities. The Alpha Legion supplied rare genetic samples, technical specifications for Imperial equipment, and logistical support for operations that required resources beyond what his own organization could provide. The Night Lord's predatory culture and emphasis on terror tactics created natural demand for the types of psychological and physiological modifications that Bile's research had produced. Their scattered warbands often lacked the resources for large-scale enhancement programs, but were willing to pay premium prices for individual modifications that could improve their effectiveness as hunters and torturers. The relationship provided steady income while offering opportunities to test enhancement procedures under combat conditions that other clients could not provide. The modifications requested by Night Lords typically focused on sensory enhancements that improved their ability to track prey, pain tolerance improvements that allowed them to continue fighting despite severe injuries, and psychological modifications that enhanced their capacity for inflicting terror on enemy forces. These requests aligned well with certain aspects of Bile's New Men research, particularly his investigations into neural modification and sensory enhancement techniques. His dealings with various Xeno species required even greater caution and diplomatic skill, as these relationships operated outside the familiar frameworks of space marine culture and chaos politics. The Eye of Terror's chaotic nature occasionally brought alien vessels and artifacts into contact with his operations, creating opportunities for acquiring xenobiological specimens that could provide insights into alternative approaches to biological enhancement. However, these encounters also carried risks that could prove fatal if not handled with appropriate care and preparation. The Dark Eldar proved among the most valuable Xenos contacts for his research, their advanced understanding of biological manipulation and pain enhancement techniques, offering insights that complemented his own work in unexpected ways. Certain cabals within Camorra maintained research facilities that rivaled his own in sophistication, though their focus on torture and sensation rather than systematic enhancement meant that direct collaboration was rarely possible. Instead, the relationship operated through carefully negotiated exchanges of specimens and information that benefited both parties while minimizing direct contact. These exchanges typically involved trading captured Imperial subjects for Dark Eldar biotechnology or genetic samples from their various slave populations. The Dark Eldar's extensive raiding operations provided access to human genetic material from across the galaxy, including populations that had developed unique adaptations to specific environmental conditions. The diversity of these samples offered insights into human genetic plasticity that would have been impossible to obtain through his own collection efforts. The orc species presented different opportunities due to their remarkable regenerative capabilities and adaptive immune systems. Orc physiology operated according to principles that seemed to violate conventional biological understanding, with their cellular structure displaying plasticity that exceeded anything found in human genetics. The study of captured orc specimens revealed mechanisms for rapid tissue regeneration and adaptive mutation that could theoretically be adapted for use in human subjects. However, the aggressive nature of orc psychology and their tendency toward uncontrolled growth made direct application of their biological principles extremely dangerous. Bile's experiments with orc genetic material required extensive safety protocols to prevent the creation of hybrid organisms that might prove impossible to control. The few successful integrations of orc regenerative factors with human physiology produced subjects with remarkable healing capabilities, but the psychological side effects often proved severe enough to limit their practical utility. The Tau Empire's expansion into regions near the Eye of Terror created occasional opportunities for acquiring specimens and technology from this relatively young species. Their systematic approach to biological enhancement through technological integration offered alternative models for achieving superhuman capabilities without relying on genetic modification alone. The study of Tau enhancement techniques revealed principles that could potentially be adapted for use with human subjects, particularly in areas involving neural interface technology and sensory augmentation. The acquisition of Tau specimens typically occurred through intermediaries or battlefield recovery rather than direct negotiation, as the Tau Empire's rigid adherence to their greater good philosophy made them unlikely partners for someone of Bile's reputation. However, the occasional capture of Tau forces during chaos raids provided opportunities for studying their enhancement techniques and biotechnology under controlled laboratory conditions. His conflicts with Imperial forces intensified significantly as his reputation spread, and his activities became known to Inquisition monitoring networks. The Ordo Malleus classified him as a priority target due to his role in creating enhanced Chaos Space Marines and his suspected involvement in demon-related research. The Ordo Hereticus viewed his genetic modification programs as fundamental threats to human genetic purity that required immediate elimination. The Ordo Xenos became interested following reports of his experiments with alien biological material and his suspected contacts with various Xeno species. The Inquisition's response to his activities involved multiple approaches ranging from direct military assault to subtle infiltration operations designed to gather intelligence about his research programs. Inquisitor Lord Heldin of the Ordo Malleus launched several major offensives against his known facilities, deploying Grey Knights and other specialized forces in attempts to capture or eliminate him. These operations achieved limited success due to the mobility of his laboratories and the defensive capabilities of his enhanced subjects, but they forced him to maintain constant vigilance and frequently relocate his research operations. The Space Marine chapters that encountered his work typically responded with immediate hostility, viewing his genetic modifications as blasphemous corruptions of the Emperor's gift. The Ultramarines chapter developed specialized protocols for combating his enhanced subjects after several encounters revealed the inadequacy of standard anti-chaos tactics against his creations. The Imperial Fists created dedicated hunter-killer teams trained specifically to locate and destroy his mobile laboratories. The White Scars adapted their rapid strike capabilities to target his research facilities before they could relocate to safety. These conflicts provided valuable data about the combat effectiveness of his enhanced subjects while revealing areas where improvements might be needed. The performance of his creations against Loyalist Space Marines offered insights into the relative advantages and disadvantages of different enhancement approaches. The systematic analysis of battle reports and recovered equipment from these engagements informed refinements to his enhancement procedures and tactical doctrines. The Adeptus Mechanicus presented unique challenges due to their own extensive experience with biological modification and their sophisticated understanding of genetic engineering principles. Tech priests assigned to anti-heretek operations possessed knowledge that allowed them to analyze his enhancement techniques and develop countermeasures more effectively than conventional Imperial forces. Their cybernetic augmentations provided resistance to certain types of biological weapons that his subjects employed, while their analytical capabilities allowed them to predict and counter his tactical innovations. The relationship with various pirate fleets and renegade Imperial forces operated on purely mercenary terms that both parties found acceptable. These outcasts from Imperial society often possessed resources and capabilities that legitimate Chaos factions lacked, including access to Imperial shipping lanes and communication networks that could provide valuable intelligence. Their desperation for enhanced capabilities made them willing to accept the risks associated with his experimental procedures, while their expendable nature made them ideal test subjects for unproven enhancement techniques. The Red Corsairs under Huron Blackheart proved particularly valuable allies due to their pragmatic approach to resource acquisition and their willingness to work with anyone who could provide military advantages. Their extensive raiding operations generated steady supplies of captives for experimental purposes, while their control of strategic locations provided secure bases for establishing research facilities. The relationship operated through carefully negotiated contracts that specified the types and quantities of enhanced subjects to be provided in exchange for resources and protection. These pirate alliances required constant management to prevent conflicts between different factions and to ensure that agreements were honored despite the chaotic nature of the organizations involved. Bile learned to structure contracts with multiple enforcement mechanisms and contingency plans that could protect his interests even when dealing with fundamentally untrustworthy partners. The experience gained through these negotiations proved invaluable for managing the complex web of relationships that his expanding operations required. The chaos cultist networks that operated throughout Imperial space provided another avenue for acquiring resources and test subjects, while maintaining distance from his primary research facilities. These organizations often possessed access to Imperial technology and personnel that could be exploited for research purposes, while their fanatical devotion made them reliable agents for carrying out dangerous missions. The cultists' distributed nature provided redundancy against Imperial counterintelligence operations, while creating multiple pathways for information and material acquisition. The management of these diverse relationships required sophisticated intelligence networks and communication systems that could operate across the vast distances and hostile environments of the Eye of Terror and beyond. Bile developed encrypted communication protocols that allowed for secure coordination between different elements of his organization, while preventing Imperial forces from intercepting sensitive information. The establishment of relay stations and safe houses throughout chaos-controlled territory created the infrastructure necessary for maintaining contact with far-flung allies and agents. The complexity of these arrangements demanded careful attention to the political dynamics that governed relationships between different chaos factions and their various allies. Understanding the motivations and limitations of each potential partner allowed for more effective negotiation while avoiding conflicts that could disrupt ongoing research programs. The systematic analysis of faction, capabilities, and objectives informed strategic decisions about which relationships to pursue and which to avoid based on their potential contribution to his overall goals. The systematic cataloging of gene seed samples from across the galaxy had become Bile's consuming obsession, transforming his mobile laboratories into repositories of genetic material that represented the greatest collection of Space Marine hereditary data outside the Emperor's own vaults on Terra. His network of contacts throughout the Eye of Terror and beyond provided steady streams of specimens recovered from battlefields, captured during raids, or acquired through more subtle means. Each sample represented not merely biological material, but a key to understanding the fundamental principles that governed post-human enhancement and the artificial limitations that the Emperor had imposed upon his creations. The theft of Loyalist gene seed required operations of extraordinary complexity and risk, as the Space Marine chapters guarded their genetic legacy with fanatical devotion. Imperial Fist's gene seed proved particularly challenging to acquire due to that chapter's methodical approach to security and their practice of thoroughly destroying fallen battle brothers to prevent genetic material from falling into enemy hands. When Bile's agents finally succeeded in recovering intact progenitor glands from Imperial Fist's casualties during the Siege of Cadia, the specimens revealed genetic structures that emphasized cellular resilience and pain tolerance beyond even standard Astartes norms. The analysis of these samples showed modifications that enhanced bone density and cartilage strength to degrees that approached the theoretical limits of biological materials. The Imperial Fist's gene seed contained instructions for producing skeletal systems that could withstand impacts that would shatter normal Astartes bones, while their pain receptors had been modified to allow conscious function even under conditions of extreme physical trauma. These characteristics explain the chapter's legendary ability to continue fighting despite grievous wounds, but they also suggested enhancement principles that could be adapted for other applications. Blood Angel's gene seed presented different challenges due to the red thirst and black rage that affected that lineage, psychological conditions that had puzzled Imperial geneticists for millennia. Bile's examination of recovered samples revealed genetic anomalies that created feedback loops between adrenal production and neural chemistry, generating enhanced aggression and combat effectiveness at the cost of psychological stability. The modifications were so deeply integrated into the gene seed structure that removing them would require fundamental reconstruction of the entire genetic template. However, the aggressive enhancement aspects of Blood Angel's genetics offered insights into methods for improving combat reflexes and pain tolerance without triggering the psychological instabilities that plagued that chapter. Bile's experiments with isolated genetic segments revealed that specific modifications could be extracted and integrated into other gene seed lineages, creating hybrid templates that combined Blood Angel's combat enhancements with the psychological stability of other chapters. The process required extensive testing to identify compatible combinations, but successful integrations produced subjects with reaction times that exceeded even veteran assault Marines. White Scar's gene seed displayed modifications that enhanced motor coordination and spatial awareness to levels that bordered on prescience, allowing their warriors to navigate complex battlefield environments with supernatural grace. The genetic structures responsible for these enhancements operated through neural pathways that processed sensory information at accelerated rates, creating the impression of slowed time during combat situations. Bile's analysis revealed that these modifications could theoretically be enhanced further through careful genetic manipulation, potentially creating subjects with reflexes that approached Primarch-level performance. The acquisition of Raven Guard gene seed proved particularly valuable due to that chapter's unique stealth capabilities and their genetic instability that created opportunities for experimental modification. The Raven Guard lineage contained instructions for producing specialized organs that could manipulate light reflection and sound dampening, granting their warriors natural camouflage abilities that exceeded technological alternatives. However, the same genetic instability that enabled these enhancements also created vulnerability to mutation that Bile learned to exploit for his own purposes. His experiments with Raven Guard genetics focused on stabilizing the beneficial mutations while eliminating the degenerative aspects that plagued that chapter. The process involved identifying the specific genetic sequences responsible for stealth enhancements and reconstructing them within more stable frameworks derived from other gene seed lineages. The resulting hybrid templates produced subjects who possessed enhanced stealth capabilities without the organ failure and genetic degradation that affected pure Raven Guard lineages. Salamander's gene seed offered insights into thermal regulation and radiation resistance that proved invaluable for creating subjects capable of operating in extreme environments. Their genetic modifications included enhanced melanin production that provided protection against radiation exposure, while their temperature regulation systems allowed survival in conditions that would prove fatal to other Astartes. The analysis of these samples revealed principles that could be applied to create specialized subjects for operations on demon worlds or other hostile environments within the Eye of Terror. The integration of Salamander's thermal resistance with other gene seed lineages required careful calibration to avoid conflicts between different enhancement systems. Bile discovered that the thermal regulation modifications interfered with certain aspects of Imperial Fist's pain tolerance enhancements, creating subjects who could survive extreme temperatures but experienced reduced combat effectiveness due to sensory confusion. The resolution of these conflicts required development of new genetic structures that could coordinate between different enhancement systems without creating harmful interactions. Iron Hand's gene seed presented unique opportunities due to that chapter's integration of mechanical augmentations with biological systems, creating hybrid enhancement approaches that combine genetic modification with technological improvement. Their gene seed contained instructions for producing neural interfaces that could integrate seamlessly with mechanical components, while their pain tolerance modifications were specifically designed to accommodate surgical procedures required for cybernetic implantation. These characteristics suggested methods for creating subjects who could benefit from both biological and technological enhancements simultaneously. Bile's experiments with Iron Hand's genetics focused on enhancing the biological-mechanical interface capabilities while reducing the psychological obsessions that characterized that chapter. The genetic modifications responsible for their technological affinity were deeply connected to neural structures that governed personality development, making selective enhancement extremely challenging. However, successful procedures produced subjects who could interface with advanced technological systems while maintaining the emotional flexibility necessary for creative problem solving. The most ambitious aspect of Bile's gene seed research involved attempts to create hybrid warriors that combine the best characteristics of multiple chapters within single subjects. These experiments required understanding the complex interactions between different genetic modifications and the biological systems that supported them. Each gene seed lineage had evolved specific adaptations that complemented their primary enhancements, creating integrated systems that could not be simply combined without extensive modification. The creation of successful hybrid subjects demanded development of new genetic frameworks that could coordinate between different enhancement systems while maintaining biological stability. Bile's approach involved identifying the core genetic structures that governed each type of enhancement and reconstructing them within unified templates that eliminated conflicts between different modification systems. The process required extensive testing to identify viable combinations, as most attempts resulted in genetic incompatibilities that proved fatal to test subjects. The few successful hybrid subjects displayed capabilities that exceeded pure gene seed lineages in specific areas while maintaining overall biological coherence. A subject combining Imperial Fist's pain tolerance with White Scar's reflexes could continue fighting effectively despite severe injuries, while maintaining the coordination necessary for complex combat maneuvers. Another hybrid incorporating Blood Angel's aggression enhancements with Raven Guard stealth capabilities proved capable of conducting assassination missions that would have been impossible for pure lineage subjects. However, the complexity of creating stable hybrid gene seed meant that success rates remained extremely low even after years of refinement. The genetic structures involved were so intricate that minor variations in the integration process could create cascading failures that destroyed entire batches of subjects. The resource requirements for these experiments were enormous, demanding constant supplies of test subjects and genetic material that strained even Bile's extensive acquisition networks. The study of Traitor Legion gene seed provided different insights due to the mutations and modifications that chaos exposure had produced over the millennia. World Eater's gene seed displayed the effects of the Butcher's Nails implantation process, revealing how technological modifications could be integrated with genetic structures to create enhanced combat capabilities. The analysis showed that the nails had triggered genetic adaptations that improved the subject's ability to interface with the devices while reducing their capacity for complex reasoning and emotional regulation. Bile's attempts to recreate the Butcher's Nails' effects through purely genetic means met with limited success, as the original devices had relied on technological components that could not be replicated through biological modification alone. However, the genetic adaptations that the nails had triggered could be isolated and integrated into other enhancement templates, creating subjects with improved pain tolerance and combat aggression without requiring surgical implantation of mechanical devices. Death Guard gene seed revealed the extent to which Nurgle's influence had modified the basic Astartes template, creating subjects with enhanced resistance to disease and toxins at the cost of accelerated decay in other biological systems. The analysis of these samples provided insights into methods for improving immune system function and toxin resistance that could be applied to uncontaminated subjects. However, the separation of beneficial modifications from chaos corruption required extensive purification procedures that often destroyed the very genetic structures that provided the desired enhancements. The most significant breakthrough in Bile's gene seed research came through his analysis of Primarch genetic material recovered during various operations throughout his career. These samples, though limited in quantity and often degraded by age or environmental exposure, contained genetic structures of extraordinary complexity that revealed the true scope of the Emperor's genetic engineering capabilities. The Primarch templates incorporated modifications that operated through mechanisms that seemed to transcend normal biological limitations, creating capabilities that bordered on the supernatural. Fulgrim's genetic material displayed structures that enhanced sensory perception and aesthetic appreciation far beyond normal human capabilities, while also incorporating modifications that improved physical coordination and combat effectiveness. The analysis revealed that these enhancements were integrated through neural pathways that processed sensory information at rates that exceeded even the most advanced Astartes' capabilities. The genetic instructions for creating these pathways were encoded in sequences of extraordinary complexity that required advanced computational analysis to decipher. Bile's attempts to replicate Primarch-level enhancements in his own subjects met with extremely limited success, as the genetic structures involved were too complex to reproduce accurately with available technology. However, partial integration of Primarch genetic elements into his enhancement templates produced subjects with capabilities that exceeded his previous achievements. These subjects displayed sensory acuity that approached Primarch levels in specific areas, while their physical coordination and combat reflexes showed measurable improvements over standard enhanced subjects. The creation of Primarch-level specimens remained the ultimate goal of Bile's research, representing the theoretical pinnacle of human enhancement that could be achieved through genetic modification. His analysis of Primarch genetic material suggested that such beings could theoretically be created through sufficiently advanced cloning and enhancement techniques, though the resources and expertise required would exceed anything currently available. The complexity of Primarch genetics meant that even minor errors in the replication process could result in subjects with severe instabilities or fatal genetic incompatibilities. The systematic cross-contamination of different gene seed lines became a crucial component of Bile's research methodology, as the interaction between different genetic modifications often produced unexpected results that exceeded the capabilities of pure lineages. These experiments involved carefully controlled mixing of genetic material from different sources, with extensive monitoring to identify beneficial interactions while avoiding harmful combinations. The process required understanding of genetic compatibility at molecular levels that pushed the boundaries of available analytical technology. The results of cross-contamination experiments revealed that certain gene seed lineages displayed natural compatibility that allowed for successful integration, while others produced genetic conflicts that invariably proved fatal to test subjects. Imperial Fists and Iron Hands gene seeds showed remarkable compatibility due to their shared emphasis on pain tolerance and technological integration, while Blood Angels and World Eaters genetics created subjects with uncontrollable aggression that made them unsuitable for any practical application. The most successful cross-contamination experiments produced subjects who displayed enhanced capabilities in multiple areas simultaneously, creating warriors whose overall effectiveness exceeded specialized pure lineage subjects. However, these hybrid subjects often displayed psychological characteristics that differed significantly from either parent lineage, suggesting that genetic modification affected personality development in ways that were not fully understood. The management of these psychological variations required extensive conditioning and training programs that added complexity to the enhancement process. The successful integration of hybrid gene seed templates had opened pathways for Bile's most ambitious creations, yet the development of biological weapon systems that could function independently while serving his broader vision of human enhancement. The mobile laboratories that had once focused primarily on individual subject modification now housed production facilities for living weapons that combined the predatory instincts of natural organisms with the tactical intelligence of enhanced human subjects. These creatures represented the ultimate fusion of his new men philosophy with practical military applications, creating assets that could operate autonomously while advancing his research objectives through combat data collection. The initial biological weapons emerged from his experiments with accelerated mutation techniques applied to captured Imperial Guard specimens. Standard human subjects exposed to controlled warp energies while undergoing genetic modification displayed remarkable adaptability when their survival instincts were properly stimulated. The process involved surgical removal of higher brain functions responsible for complex reasoning and emotional responses, leaving only the neural structures necessary for basic motor control and predatory behavior. The resulting creatures retained human intelligence sufficient for following simple tactical instructions, while displaying aggression levels that exceeded even the most fanatical cultists. These early weapon subjects proved effective in field testing against Imperial reconnaissance forces, demonstrating the viability of mass-produced biological assets for military applications. Their enhanced muscular systems allowed them to tear through standard flak armor with bare hands, while modified sensory organs granted tracking capabilities that exceeded trained hunting animals. The creatures required minimal logistical support compared to conventional troops, as their modified digestive systems could process almost any organic matter for sustenance. Most importantly, their biological nature made them immune to the technological countermeasures that Imperial forces typically employed against Chaos War machines. The refinement of these biological weapons led to the development of specialized toxin production systems that could be integrated into various subject types depending on tactical requirements. Bile's analysis of venomous species encountered throughout the galaxy had revealed dozens of different approaches to chemical warfare that could be adapted for human physiology. The poison glands of Catachon Death Worlders provided templates for creating subjects who could secrete contact toxins through their skin, while the venom sacs of certain xenospecies offered insights into developing projectile delivery systems for more potent chemical compounds. The most successful toxin-producing subjects incorporated modified salivary glands that could generate neurotoxins capable of paralyzing standard human subjects within seconds of exposure. These weapons subjects could deliver their payload through bite attacks during close combat, or they could spit the toxin with accuracy sufficient to affect targets at ranges exceeding 10 meters. The neurotoxin itself was designed to cause progressive paralysis that began with the extremities and advanced toward vital organs, creating psychological terror in enemy forces who witnessed their comrades' slow incapacitation. The development of airborne toxin delivery systems required more sophisticated modifications that incorporated specialized respiratory organs capable of aerosolizing chemical compounds. These subjects could release toxic clouds that affected entire squads of enemy troops simultaneously, though the process required careful timing to avoid affecting friendly forces operating in the same area. The toxins were engineered to break down rapidly in atmospheric conditions to prevent long-term environmental contamination that might interfere with subsequent operations in the same region. Disease-based weapons presented different challenges due to the unpredictable nature of biological pathogens and their tendency to mutate beyond intended parameters. Bile's early experiments with engineered plagues had resulted in several containment breaches that decimated test populations before the diseases could be properly studied or controlled. The development of stable pathogenic weapons required extensive research into viral and bacterial modification techniques that could create predictable effects while maintaining sufficient virulence to serve military purposes. The breakthrough in disease weapon development came through his analysis of Nurgle-corrupted biological samples recovered from Death Guard casualties. The pathogens affecting these subjects displayed remarkable stability despite their supernatural origins, maintaining consistent effects across multiple generations of transmission. Bile's systematic study of these organisms revealed genetic structures that governed pathogen behavior in ways that conventional Imperial medical science had never understood. The application of these principles to artificially created diseases produced weapons that could spread through enemy populations with mathematical precision while avoiding the random mutations that had plagued earlier experiments. The most effective disease weapons were designed to target specific aspects of human physiology that would incapacitate rather than kill their victims. Respiratory infections that caused progressive breathing difficulties forced enemy units to divert resources toward medical support while reducing their combat effectiveness. Neurological pathogens that affected balance and coordination made precision weapons usage impossible, while leaving victims conscious enough to spread panic through their units. The psychological impact of these diseases often exceeded their direct military effects, as Imperial forces struggled to maintain morale when facing invisible enemies that could strike without warning. The creation of enhanced human soldiers for various clients required adaptation of his new men research to meet specific tactical requirements while maintaining the biological stability that distinguished his work from chaos-corrupted alternatives. Each client faction possessed different operational priorities that demanded customized enhancement approaches. Iron Warriors required subjects capable of surviving prolonged siege warfare in toxic environments. Night Lords needed enhanced predators who could operate independently during terror campaigns. Word Bearers sought warriors whose modifications reflected their devotion to chaos without compromising their combat effectiveness. The development of siege warfare specialists for Iron Warriors clients involved extensive modifications to respiratory and circulatory systems that could function in environments contaminated by chemical weapons or industrial pollutants. These subjects received enhanced lung capacity and modified blood chemistry that provided resistance to most common battlefield toxins. Their skeletal systems were reinforced with additional calcium deposits that improved their ability to survive building collapses and artillery bombardments. Modified pain receptors allowed them to continue fighting despite injuries that would incapacitate standard human troops, while enhanced healing factors ensured rapid recovery from wounds that did not prove immediately fatal. Terror warfare specialists created for Night Lords operations required different modifications that emphasized stealth capabilities and psychological intimidation factors. These subjects received enhanced sensory organs that could function effectively in complete darkness, while modified muscle fibers allowed for silent movement that exceeded even trained assassins. Their physical appearance was altered through controlled mutations that created disturbing visual effects designed to trigger primal fear responses in human observers. Specialized vocal modifications allowed them to produce sounds that could cause disorientation and panic in enemy forces, while enhanced jaw muscles and modified teeth enabled them to inflict gruesome wounds that served psychological warfare purposes. The creation of Word-Bearers enhancement subjects required careful balance between practical military improvements and aesthetic modifications that satisfied their clients' religious sensibilities. These warriors received physical alterations that created the appearance of chaos blessing without the psychological instabilities that characterized true corruption. Controlled mutations produced horn-like bone growths and skin discoloration that suggested supernatural favor, while enhanced physical capabilities provided genuine combat advantages. The modifications were designed to be reversible through surgical procedures, allowing subjects to operate in environments where their altered appearance might prove disadvantageous. Mutant creation programs expanded beyond simple enhancement procedures to encompass the development of entirely new subspecies designed for specific operational roles. These projects required extensive genetic modification that pushed the boundaries of human biological plasticity while maintaining sufficient neural function to ensure tactical reliability. The resulting creatures bore only superficial resemblance to their human origins, though they retained enough intelligence to follow complex instructions and adapt to changing battlefield conditions. Aquatic combat mutants were developed for operations on ocean worlds where conventional forces faced significant disadvantages. These subjects received gills that could extract oxygen from water while maintaining lung function for surface operations. Web digits and modified limb proportions improved swimming speed and underwater maneuverability, while enhanced pressure tolerance allowed them to operate at depths that would crush unmodified humans. Specialized sensory organs provided echolocation capabilities similar to those found in marine predators, enabling navigation and target identification in murky underwater environments. Void warfare mutants represented some of Bile's most extreme modifications, as survival in space environments required fundamental alterations to human physiology that challenged the limits of biological adaptation. These subjects received modified circulatory systems that could function in zero-gravity conditions without the blood pooling that affected normal humans. Enhanced lung capacity and modified oxygen processing allowed them to survive in low-atmosphere environments for extended periods. Radiation-resistant skin modifications provided protection against cosmic radiation exposure, while enhanced bone density prevented the skeletal deterioration that plagued long-term void dwellers. Underground combat specialists were created for tunnel warfare and subterranean operations, where conventional forces faced significant mobility restrictions. These mutants received enhanced proprioception that allowed navigation in complete darkness through spatial awareness alone. Modified limb proportions and joint flexibility enabled movement through confined spaces that would trap normal-sized humans. Enhanced tactile sensitivity in their fingertips provided the ability to detect vibrations and air currents that could reveal hidden passages or approaching enemies. Specialized digestive systems allowed them to survive on minimal rations for extended periods during prolonged underground operations. The development of chimeric creatures that combined human intelligence with animal capabilities required extensive research into cross-species genetic integration techniques. These experiments pushed beyond the boundaries of conventional enhancement into territories that imperial science would consider fundamentally heretical. The successful creation of stable human-animal hybrids demanded understanding of genetic compatibility at molecular levels that exceeded most available analytical capabilities. Canine human hybrids proved among the most successful chimeric creations, combining human tactical intelligence with enhanced sensory capabilities derived from predatory animals. These subjects retained human-level reasoning abilities while gaining olfactory systems that could track individual targets across vast distances. Enhanced auditory perception allowed them to detect approaching enemies through sound signatures that would be inaudible to unmodified humans. Modified muscle fiber composition provided running speeds that exceeded human athletic performance while maintaining the endurance necessary for extended pursuit operations. Feline-human hybrids emphasized stealth and agility modifications that created superior infiltration specialists. These subjects received enhanced balance and coordination that allowed them to navigate complex three-dimensional environments with supernatural grace. Modified skeletal systems provided flexibility that enabled movement through spaces barely large enough to accommodate their bodies. Enhanced night vision granted near-perfect visibility in low-light conditions, while modified vocal cords allowed them to communicate through subsonic frequencies that could not be detected by standard Imperial monitoring equipment. Avian-human hybrids represented the most ambitious chimeric experiments, though the fundamental differences between mammalian and avian physiology made successful integration extremely challenging. The few viable subjects displayed enhanced visual acuity that exceeded even space marine capabilities, while modified respiratory systems provided improved oxygen processing that enhanced physical endurance. However, the structural modifications required for flight capability proved incompatible with human neural architecture, limiting these subjects to ground-based operations despite their avian genetic components. The surgical enhancement procedures that created these various subjects required innovations in medical technology that exceeded anything available through conventional Imperial sources. Bile's development of specialized chirurgeon tools incorporated both mechanical precision and biological integration capabilities that allowed for modifications previously considered impossible. These instruments could perform genetic alterations at the cellular level while maintaining perfect sterile conditions necessary for preventing infection during extended surgical procedures. The signature chirurgeon tools that became synonymous with Bile's work incorporated self-sterilizing surfaces that eliminated bacterial contamination through controlled electromagnetic fields. Micro-manipulation capabilities allowed for precise genetic modification of individual cells without damaging surrounding tissue. Integrated monitoring systems provided real-time feedback on subject vital signs and genetic stability during modification procedures. The tool's modular design enabled rapid reconfiguration for different types of surgical procedures, while their compact construction allowed them to function effectively within the confined spaces of mobile laboratories. The integration of these chirurgeon tools with Bile's own biology represented the ultimate expression of his enhancement philosophy applied to himself. The surgical instruments were connected to his nervous system through neural interfaces that provided direct control without requiring conscious thought. This integration allowed him to perform complex procedures with precision that exceeded purely mechanical systems, while the biological connection enabled intuitive understanding of subject responses during modification processes. The tools became extensions of his own body, responding to his intentions with the same immediacy as natural limbs. The neural integration process required extensive modification of Bile's own brain structure to accommodate the additional sensory input and motor control requirements. Specialized neural pathways were created to process data from the chirurgeon tool's monitoring systems, while enhanced motor cortex regions provided the precise control necessary for cellular-level manipulation. The modifications also included backup neural circuits that could maintain tool function even if primary control systems were damaged during combat or other hazardous situations. The biological integration extended beyond simple neural connections to encompass metabolic systems that could support the enhanced surgical capabilities. Modified adrenal glands provided the sustained energy output necessary for extended surgical procedures, while enhanced cardiovascular systems ensured adequate blood flow to support increased neural activity. Specialized organs were created to process the biochemical byproducts of extended tool usage, preventing the accumulation of metabolic waste that could interfere with surgical precision. The development of specialized warrior organisms for specific tactical roles required understanding of combat psychology and battlefield dynamics that went beyond purely biological considerations. These creatures needed to function effectively as military assets while maintaining sufficient independence to adapt to changing tactical situations. The balance between programmed responses and autonomous decision-making capabilities proved crucial for creating subjects who could serve their intended purposes without requiring constant supervision. Close combat specialists were designed with enhanced reflexes and pain tolerance that allowed them to engage enemy forces in melee situations where conventional weapons proved ineffective. These subjects received modified muscle fiber composition that provided explosive strength for brief periods, while enhanced skeletal systems could withstand the impact forces generated by their own attacks. Specialized nervous system modifications reduced reaction times to levels that approached superhuman performance, enabling them to respond to threats faster than enemy forces could adjust their tactics. Ranged combat specialists incorporated enhanced visual systems and improved hand-eye coordination that made them superior marksmen compared to conventionally trained soldiers. These subjects could identify and engage targets at ranges that exceeded standard human visual capabilities, while modified neural processing allowed them to calculate trajectory adjustments for moving targets with mathematical precision. Enhanced respiratory control provided the stability necessary for accurate shooting during extended engagements, while modified cardiovascular systems maintained steady heart rates that prevented accuracy degradation under stress. Reconnaissance specialists emphasized sensory enhancement and stealth capabilities that made them ideal for intelligence gathering operations behind enemy lines. These subjects could detect enemy movements through subtle environmental changes that would be invisible to unmodified observers, while their enhanced memory systems allowed them to retain detailed tactical information for extended periods without written records. Modified metabolic systems reduced their caloric requirements, and eliminated waste production that might reveal their presence to enemy forces conducting counter-reconnaissance operations. The systematic documentation of enhancement procedures had provided Bile with the theoretical foundation necessary for expanding his operations beyond the confines of the Eye of Terror. But the era Indomitus presented unprecedented opportunities and challenges that would test every aspect of his accumulated knowledge. The Great Rift's creation had torn reality itself asunder, flooding vast regions of Imperial space with warp energies that created conditions similar to those within the Eye of Terror. These transformed regions offered new territories for establishing research facilities while providing access to Imperial populations that had been isolated from central authority for decades or centuries. The emergence of Primaris Space Marines under Robute Guilliman's leadership represented a fundamental shift in Imperial military capabilities that demanded immediate investigation. These enhanced Astartes displayed physical capabilities that exceeded standard Space Marines in measurable ways, suggesting that the Imperium had developed new gene seed modification techniques during the millennia since the heresy. The acquisition of Primaris genetic material became a priority that required careful planning and significant resource allocation, as these new warriors were deployed in smaller numbers and guarded with even greater vigilance than conventional Space Marines. Bile's first encounter with Primaris Marines occurred during the Plague Wars in Ultramar, where his mobile laboratories had been conducting research on Nurgle-corrupted populations to understand the mechanisms through which disease-based mutations affected human physiology. The Primaris reinforcements deployed to support the Ultramarines displayed enhanced strength and resilience that allowed them to operate effectively in environments that would have challenged even veteran Astartes. Their larger physical frames suggested fundamental modifications to the gene seed implantation process, while their improved equipment indicated technological advances that the Imperium had developed during Guilliman's absence. The recovery of Primaris genetic samples required infiltration operations that pushed the capabilities of his enhanced agents to their limits. Standard reconnaissance subjects proved inadequate for penetrating the security measures that protected Primaris forces, necessitating the deployment of his most sophisticated creations. The stealth specialists developed for Night Lord's operations provided the infiltration capabilities necessary to approach Primaris positions undetected, while their enhanced sensory organs allowed them to identify opportunities for sample collection during the chaos of active combat. The analysis of recovered Primaris genetic material revealed modifications that operated through principles fundamentally different from those employed in standard Astartes creation. The gene seed displayed additional organs and enhanced versions of existing implants that provided capabilities exceeding anything Bile had previously encountered. The Belisarian furnace alone represented a breakthrough in metabolic enhancement that could theoretically be adapted for use in his own subjects. The Magnificat organ-suggested methods for improving Space Marine capabilities that had been beyond Imperial science during the Great Crusade. The integration of Primaris genetic elements into his existing enhancement templates required extensive experimentation to identify compatible combinations, while avoiding the rejection responses that characterized most attempts at gene seed hybridization. The Primaris modifications were designed to work within specific biological frameworks that differed significantly from the templates he had developed over the millennia. Success required understanding not merely the genetic structures themselves, but the underlying principles that governed their interaction with human physiology. The few successful integrations of Primaris genetic elements produced subjects whose capabilities exceeded his previous achievements in specific areas. Enhanced cardiovascular systems provided endurance that allowed sustained combat operations far beyond normal human limitations. Improved skeletal reinforcement created subjects who could survive impacts that would prove fatal to unmodified humans while maintaining the mobility necessary for complex tactical maneuvers. The muscular enhancements granted strength levels that approached those of Space Marines while preserving the neural flexibility that his new men philosophy demanded. However, the complexity of Primaris genetics meant that full replication remained beyond his current capabilities. The modifications were integrated through mechanisms that required understanding of gene seed cultivation techniques that the Imperium had developed during his absence from Imperial space. The missing knowledge represented gaps in his theoretical framework that could only be filled through acquisition of additional Imperial research data or capture of the technical personnel responsible for Primaris creation. The establishment of hidden laboratories throughout Imperial space required careful selection of locations that could provide the resources necessary for advanced research while remaining concealed from Imperial authorities. The Great Rift's effects had created numerous worlds where Imperial control had collapsed or become severely compromised, offering opportunities for establishing facilities in regions where local populations could be exploited without triggering immediate military responses. These sites needed to provide access to diverse human populations for experimental purposes while maintaining sufficient infrastructure to support sophisticated biological research. The demon world of Harmony, twisted by Slaanesh's influence into a realm where sensation and pain intermingled in impossible ways, provided an ideal testing ground for subjects designed to operate in environments that defied normal physical laws. The world's reality warping effects allowed for experiments that would be impossible under normal conditions, while its isolation within the Great Rift prevented Imperial interference with ongoing research programs. The establishment of permanent facilities on Harmony required extensive shielding to protect sensitive equipment from the world's chaotic emanations, but the unique environmental conditions enabled breakthrough discoveries in consciousness transfer and neural modification techniques. The recruitment of new disciples during this period drew from populations throughout the scattered regions affected by the Great Rift's expansion. Former Imperial scientists who had been abandoned by evacuating authorities proved particularly valuable, as their existing knowledge could be redirected toward his research objectives with minimal additional training. Chaos cultists from worlds that had fallen to warp incursions provided willing subjects for experimental procedures, while serving as sources of information about Imperial defensive measures and population distributions. The most promising disciples emerged from the ranks of former apothecaries, whose chapters had been destroyed during the various conflicts that characterized the era Indomitus. These individuals possessed the technical expertise necessary for advanced biological research, while harboring the resentment toward Imperial authority that made them receptive to his philosophical arguments. Their existing knowledge of gene seed cultivation and surgical procedures could be enhanced through exposure to his more advanced techniques, creating subordinates capable of conducting independent research operations. The training programs developed for these new disciples incorporated lessons learned from millennia of experimentation, while adapting to the changed conditions that characterize the current era. The curriculum emphasized practical applications of enhancement techniques rather than purely theoretical knowledge, as the demands of operating in contested Imperial space required immediate results rather than long-term research projects. Students learned to identify optimal subjects for various types of modification while developing the surgical skills necessary to perform complex procedures under field conditions. The expansion of his organization required development of communication networks that could coordinate activities across vast distances while maintaining security against Imperial intelligence operations. The warp-touched nature of many regions affected by the Great Rift created opportunities for establishing relay stations that could transmit information through immaterial channels that conventional Imperial monitoring could not intercept. These networks enabled coordination between different research facilities while providing early warning of Imperial military movements that might threaten ongoing operations. The systematic infiltration of Imperial institutions provided access to research data and genetic samples that would have been impossible to obtain through direct military action. Medical facilities on worlds affected by the Great Rift often contained genetic databases that included samples from across the Imperium, while their reduced security made them vulnerable to infiltration by his enhanced agents. The corruption of Imperial medical personnel through promises of enhanced capabilities or threats against their families created networks of informants who could provide ongoing intelligence about Imperial research activities. The development of specialized infiltration subjects required modifications that allowed them to pass Imperial medical screening while retaining the enhanced capabilities necessary for their missions. These agents received genetic modifications that could be activated or deactivated through biochemical triggers, allowing them to appear as baseline humans during routine examinations while possessing superhuman capabilities when needed. The complexity of these modifications required extensive testing to ensure that the activation processes did not create detectable changes in blood chemistry or other biological markers that Imperial authorities might monitor. The most successful infiltration operations targeted Imperial research facilities that contained genetic samples or technical data relevant to his ongoing projects. The acquisition of Space Marine gene seed from chapter repositories required careful planning and precise execution, as these facilities were protected by security measures that could detect most forms of infiltration. Success depended on identifying vulnerabilities in security protocols while ensuring that theft operations appeared to be the work of conventional raiders rather than sophisticated intelligence operations. The conflicts with various Imperial forces that resulted from these expanded operations provided valuable data about the combat effectiveness of his enhanced subjects while revealing areas where improvements might be needed. Astra Militarum forces proved vulnerable to his biological weapons, as their limited medical capabilities could not counter the toxins and diseases that his subjects employed. However, Space Marine forces displayed resistance to many of his enhancement techniques, suggesting that their gene seed modifications provided protection against certain types of biological warfare. The encounters with Primaris Marines revealed the extent to which Imperial military capabilities had advanced during his absence from conventional battlefields. These enhanced Astartes displayed tactical coordination and individual combat effectiveness that exceeded standard Space Marines while maintaining the disciplined approach that characterized Imperial military doctrine. Their improved equipment included weapons and armor that incorporated technological advances beyond anything he had previously encountered, suggesting that the Imperium had made significant progress in military technology during the millennia since the heresy. The systematic analysis of battlefield performance data from these encounters informed refinements to his enhancement procedures and tactical doctrines. The subjects who performed most effectively against Imperial forces displayed combinations of physical enhancement and tactical flexibility that allowed them to adapt to changing battlefield conditions without losing combat effectiveness. These characteristics became priorities for future enhancement programs, as the ability to operate against improved Imperial forces would be crucial for the success of expanded operations. The establishment of recruitment networks within Imperial space required careful cultivation of contacts among populations that had been abandoned or neglected by Imperial authorities. The worlds affected by the Great Rift often contained communities that had been cut off from Imperial support for decades, creating populations that were receptive to alternative sources of aid and protection. These communities could provide test subjects for experimental procedures while serving as sources of intelligence about Imperial military movements and defensive preparations. The development of enhanced human specimens for various applications continued to evolve based on lessons learned from field operations and laboratory experiments. Combat subjects designed for operations against Imperial forces required modifications that could counter the improved capabilities of Primaris Marines while maintaining the flexibility necessary for operations in diverse environments. The integration of captured Imperial technology with biological enhancement techniques created hybrid subjects whose capabilities exceeded purely biological or technological approaches alone. The ongoing war against both chaos corruption and Imperial dogma required careful balance between exploiting the opportunities that chaos influence provided while avoiding the dependencies and instabilities that characterized full corruption. Bile's subjects needed to function effectively in warp-touched environments without succumbing to the psychological deterioration that affected most humans exposed to chaos energies. The development of protective modifications that could shield subjects from corruption while allowing them to benefit from enhanced capabilities became a crucial aspect of his research programs. The pursuit of scientific advancement through systematic experimentation had transformed Bile from a single renegade apothecary into the architect of a galaxy-spanning network of genetic modification programs that touched virtually every corner of human space. His creations, enhanced subjects, and disciples had spread far beyond the confines of his mobile laboratories, establishing independent operations that continued his work while adapting his techniques to local conditions and opportunities. The influence of his research extended through multiple vectors of dissemination, creating ripple effects that would reshape the nature of human evolution across thousands of worlds. The enhanced subjects who had survived his experimental procedures and been released into the galaxy carried his genetic modifications into populations that had never encountered his work directly. These individuals, possessing capabilities that exceeded baseline human performance while maintaining psychological stability, often rose to positions of influence within their communities. Their enhanced physical strength, improved cognitive function, and extended lifespans granted advantages that allowed them to accumulate power and resources that could be directed toward furthering Bile's vision of human advancement. On the hive world of Necromunda, former test subjects who had escaped his laboratories during Imperial raids established underground networks that provided genetic enhancement services to gangers and underhive dwellers seeking advantages in their brutal territorial conflicts. These operations utilized simplified versions of his modification techniques that could be performed with scavenged medical equipment and black market pharmaceuticals. While the results lacked the sophistication of his laboratory-produced subjects, they demonstrated the practical applications of his research for populations that Imperial authorities had abandoned to their fate. The Chaos Space Marine warbands that had employed his services carried his techniques and enhanced warriors throughout their campaigns across Imperial space. Iron Warrior siege companies incorporated his toxin-producing subjects into their assault formations, using these biological weapons to clear fortified positions that conventional explosives could not breach effectively. The enhanced subjects' ability to function in contaminated environments made them ideal for operations involving chemical weapons or industrial pollutants, while their resistance to conventional medical countermeasures ensured that Imperial defenders could not easily neutralize their effects. Night Lord's terror campaigns began incorporating his stealth-enhanced subjects as assassins and infiltrators who could penetrate Imperial defensive lines with supernatural grace. These modified warriors possessed sensory capabilities that allowed them to navigate in complete darkness, while their enhanced reflexes enabled them to eliminate sentries without triggering alarm systems. The psychological impact of their activities often exceeded their direct military value, as Imperial forces struggled to maintain morale when facing enemies who could strike without warning from seemingly impossible positions. Wordbearer's expeditionary fleets utilized his disease weapon subjects to weaken Imperial populations before launching full-scale invasions. The engineered pathogens spread through civilian populations with mathematical precision, creating medical emergencies that overwhelmed local healthcare systems while forcing military units to divert resources toward containment efforts. The diseases were designed to incapacitate rather than kill their victims, ensuring that affected worlds retained sufficient population to serve as recruitment sources for chaos cultist organizations. The Alpha Legion's infiltration networks incorporated his enhanced agents into long-term intelligence operations that required subjects capable of maintaining cover identities for decades without detection. These modified operatives possessed genetic alterations that could be activated through biochemical triggers, allowing them to display superhuman capabilities when necessary while appearing as unremarkable Imperial citizens during routine interactions. Their enhanced memory systems enabled them to retain vast amounts of intelligence data without requiring written records that might compromise their operations. Red Corsair's raiding fleets employed his aquatic combat mutants for operations against ocean worlds and void installations, where conventional boarding actions faced significant disadvantages. These subjects could survive in environments that would prove fatal to unmodified humans while maintaining the intelligence necessary to complete complex mission objectives. Their ability to operate independently for extended periods reduced the logistical burden on raiding forces while providing capabilities that conventional Chaos Space Marines could not match. The systematic documentation and distribution of his enhancement techniques through various channels had created a body of knowledge that influenced genetic modification programs throughout Chaos-controlled territories. Renegade scientists and fallen apothecaries studied his methods through captured research data, recovered subjects, and direct instruction from his disciples. These secondary practitioners adapted his techniques to local conditions and available resources, creating variations that reflected their own objectives while maintaining the fundamental principles that distinguished his work from simple chaos corruption. The Consortium of Flesh, as Imperial intelligence agencies, had designated his network of contacts and collaborators, operated through cells that maintained minimal contact with each other, while sharing resources and information through carefully established protocols. Each cell specialized in different aspects of his research, with some focusing on gene seed cultivation, while others concentrated on surgical enhancement procedures or biological weapon development. The distributed nature of these operations provided redundancy against Imperial counterintelligence efforts, while enabling specialization that improved overall efficiency. Forge worlds that had fallen to Chaos influence incorporated his biological enhancement techniques into their cybernetic augmentation programs, creating hybrid subjects that combined mechanical improvements with genetic modifications. These experiments produced warriors whose capabilities exceeded purely biological or technological enhancement approaches, while maintaining the reliability that characterized Adeptus Mechanicus manufacturing standards. The integration of his organic modifications with mechanical augmentations opened new possibilities for creating subjects whose capabilities transcended the limitations of either approach alone. Mining worlds throughout the galaxy began reporting incidents involving enhanced human subjects whose capabilities suggested exposure to advanced genetic modification techniques. These individuals displayed strength and endurance that exceeded even the most robust baseline humans, while maintaining the intelligence necessary to operate complex industrial equipment. Imperial authorities initially attributed these reports to natural adaptation to harsh working conditions, but systematic analysis revealed genetic alterations that matched patterns associated with Bile's research programs. Agricultural worlds experienced outbreaks of modified organisms that displayed characteristics suggesting artificial genetic manipulation rather than natural evolution. These creatures possessed enhanced nutritional value and accelerated growth rates that could theoretically address food security issues throughout the Imperium, but their artificial origins raised concerns about potential contamination of natural ecosystems. The organism's genetic structures contained markers that linked them to research programs associated with Bile's network, suggesting that his influence extended into areas beyond direct human enhancement. Hive cities across Imperial space reported increasing incidents of gang warfare involving combatants who displayed superhuman capabilities that exceeded the effects of conventional combat drugs or cybernetic augmentation. These enhanced individuals possessed coordination and reflexes that allowed them to dominate conventional opponents while maintaining the tactical intelligence necessary for complex criminal operations. The spread of these enhanced gangers created security challenges that stretched Imperial law enforcement capabilities, while demonstrating the practical applications of genetic modification technology in urban environments. The Imperium's response to these widespread manifestations of Bile's influence involved multiple approaches that reflected the diverse nature of the threats his network posed. The Ordo Malleus classified him as a priority target, whose elimination would require coordinated efforts from multiple Imperial agencies, while the Ordo Hereticus focused on identifying and neutralizing the networks that distributed his enhancement techniques throughout Imperial space. The Ordo Xenos became involved following reports of his experiments with alien genetic material and his suspected contacts with various Xeno species. Inquisitor Lord Helding of the Ordo Malleus had spent decades tracking Bile's activities throughout the Eye of Terror and beyond, accumulating intelligence that revealed the scope and sophistication of his operations. Helding's research identified patterns in Bile's movements and activities that suggested long-term strategic objectives, extending far beyond simple revenge against the Imperium. The Inquisitor's analysis indicated that Bile viewed the current conflict as merely one phase of a longer campaign to replace humanity with his genetically enhanced new men. The Grey Knights chapter developed specialized protocols for combating Bile's enhanced subjects after several encounters revealed the inadequacy of standard anti-chaos tactics against his creations. These modified warriors possessed resistance to psychic attacks that exceeded normal human capabilities, while maintaining tactical flexibility that allowed them to adapt to changing battlefield conditions. The Grey Knights' response involved development of new combat doctrines that emphasized rapid elimination of enhanced subjects before they could exploit their superior capabilities. Deathwatch kill teams assigned to operations against Bile's network received specialized training in recognizing and countering various types of genetic modification that his subjects might possess. The diversity of enhancement techniques employed by his organization required tactical flexibility that exceeded standard Astartes combat doctrines, as each encounter might involve subjects with entirely different capabilities and vulnerabilities. The Deathwatch developed comprehensive databases of known enhancement types while establishing protocols for rapidly assessing and responding to previously unknown modifications. The Adeptus Mechanicus contributed to anti-Bile operations through development of detection equipment that could identify genetic modifications in living subjects without requiring invasive medical procedures. These devices utilized advanced scanning technology that could analyze biological signatures at molecular levels, revealing artificial modifications that might otherwise remain undetected. The equipment proved particularly valuable for screening populations in areas where Bile's network was suspected of operating, though the complexity of his modifications often required extensive analysis to distinguish them from natural genetic variation. Space Marine chapters throughout the galaxy received briefings on Bile's activities and the threats posed by his enhanced subjects, though the information provided was carefully edited to avoid revealing details that might prove useful to potential traitors within their ranks. The Ultramarines developed comprehensive tactical manuals for combating genetically enhanced opponents, while the Imperial Fists created specialized assault protocols for attacking fortified positions defended by subjects with superhuman capabilities. The White Scars adapted their rapid strike tactics to account for enemies whose reflexes might exceed even Astartes' reaction times. The Astra Militarum faced particular challenges when confronting Bile's biological weapons, as their limited medical capabilities provided little protection against engineered toxins and diseases. Regiment commanders received training in recognizing the symptoms of various biological agents, while medical personnel learned containment procedures that could limit the spread of artificial pathogens. However, the diversity of biological weapons employed by Bile's network meant that countermeasures developed for one type of agent might prove ineffective against different variants. Imperial Navy vessels operating in regions where Bile's network was active implemented enhanced medical screening procedures for crew members and passengers to prevent infiltration by his enhanced agents. These protocols required extensive genetic testing that could identify artificial modifications, though the sophistication of his enhancement techniques meant that detection was not always possible. The Navy also developed specialized quarantine procedures for dealing with suspected biological contamination from his weapons systems. The Adeptus Archives established task forces dedicated to investigating criminal organizations that employed genetically enhanced personnel, as these groups often served as recruitment sources or testing grounds for Bile's research programs. The Archives investigations revealed connections between apparently unrelated criminal activities across multiple sectors, suggesting coordination through networks that operated beyond normal Imperial monitoring capabilities. The task forces developed specialized interrogation techniques designed to extract information from enhanced subjects whose psychological conditioning might resist conventional methods. Planetary defense forces throughout Imperial space received warnings about potential infiltration by enhanced subjects whose capabilities could allow them to penetrate security measures designed for baseline humans. These advisories included guidance on recognizing signs of genetic modification, while emphasizing the importance of maintaining vigilance against individuals who displayed unusual physical or mental capabilities. However, the subtle nature of many of Bile's modifications meant that detection often required medical examination by qualified personnel. The influence of Bile's research extended beyond direct military applications to encompass broader questions about human evolution and the future of the species. His New Men philosophy challenged fundamental assumptions about human potential, while demonstrating that genetic enhancement could produce stable improvements without the corruption associated with chaos worship. The existence of his enhanced subjects provided empirical evidence that humanity could transcend its current limitations through scientific advancement rather than supernatural intervention. Academic institutions throughout the Imperium began reporting increased interest in genetic research and biological enhancement techniques, though Imperial authorities maintained strict controls on access to relevant materials and information. Underground networks of researchers shared data and specimens through channels that operated beyond official oversight, creating communities of scholars who pursued knowledge that Imperial doctrine considered heretical. These networks often served as recruitment sources for Bile's organization, as their members possessed the expertise necessary for advanced biological research. Medical facilities across the galaxy experienced increased demand for genetic testing and enhancement procedures from patients who sought capabilities similar to those displayed by Bile's subjects. While most requests involved relatively minor modifications that fell within acceptable Imperial medical practice, the underlying desire for enhancement reflected changing attitudes toward human potential and the limitations imposed by natural biology. These trends suggested that Bile's vision of human evolution resonated with populations throughout Imperial space, even among those who had never encountered his work directly. The technological innovations developed for his research programs had applications that extended far beyond genetic enhancement, influencing fields ranging from industrial manufacturing to agricultural production. His cultivation techniques could theoretically be adapted for growing enhanced food crops that could address nutritional deficiencies throughout the Imperium, while his surgical innovations might improve medical treatment for conditions that currently exceeded Imperial healthcare capabilities. However, the heretical nature of his research meant that these potential benefits remained largely unexploited by Imperial authorities. The philosophical implications of his work continued to generate debate among Imperial scholars and theologians, who struggled to reconcile his achievements with established doctrine regarding human nature and divine will. The existence of stable genetic enhancements that operated without chaos corruption challenged assumptions about the relationship between scientific advancement and spiritual purity, while the capabilities displayed by his subjects suggested possibilities for human development that imperial ideology had never acknowledged. Yet these debates remained largely academic, as the true scope of Bile's ultimate ambitions extended far beyond the immediate military applications that had brought him to imperial attention. The New Men Project represented more than simply creating enhanced soldiers or biological weapons for the ongoing conflict between imperial and chaos forces. Bile's vision encompassed the complete replacement of baseline humanity with a genetically superior subspecies that would inherit the galaxy through evolutionary advantage rather than military conquest. His research had demonstrated that human genetic templates contained vast untapped potential that could be accessed through systematic modification without requiring the corrupting influence of chaos energies or the artificial limitations imposed by imperial doctrine. The theoretical framework underlying this vision drew upon millennia of accumulated data regarding human genetic variation and adaptation throughout the galaxy. His observations during the Great Crusade had revealed the remarkable plasticity of human physiology when exposed to different environmental pressures, while his subsequent research had identified the specific genetic mechanisms that governed these adaptive responses. The integration of these natural adaptation processes with controlled genetic modification could theoretically produce beings whose capabilities would exceed both baseline humans and chaos-corrupted subjects, while maintaining perfect biological stability across multiple generations. The practical implementation of this vision required resources and time scales that exceeded anything achievable through conventional military campaigns or political maneuvering. The creation of sufficient numbers of new men to establish viable breeding populations would demand industrial-scale cloning operations supported by vast networks of research facilities and genetic laboratories. The subjects would need to be distributed throughout the galaxy in ways that ensured their survival and reproduction, while avoiding detection by imperial authorities or interference from chaos forces seeking to corrupt them for their own purposes. Bile's approach to this challenge involved establishing self-sustaining colonies of enhanced subjects in regions where they could develop independently, while maintaining genetic diversity sufficient to prevent inbreeding depression. These populations would be seeded with carefully selected genetic templates that incorporated the most successful modifications from his research programs, while ensuring compatibility between different enhancement types. The colonies would operate under cover identities that allowed them to interact with baseline human populations without revealing their true nature, gradually expanding their influence through economic and political means rather than direct conquest. The selection of suitable locations for these colonies required analysis of thousands of potential sites throughout imperial space and beyond. Worlds affected by the Great Rift offered opportunities for establishing communities in regions where imperial control had been severely compromised, while frontier planets provided isolation necessary for long-term development without interference. The colonies needed to possess sufficient resources to support advanced technological development while maintaining defensible positions that could resist military assault from hostile forces. The genetic templates used for colony populations incorporated lessons learned from decades of experimentation with different enhancement approaches. Physical modifications emphasized capabilities that would provide advantages in diverse environments rather than specialization for specific combat roles. Cognitive enhancements focused on improving learning capacity and creative problem-solving rather than simple information processing speed. Psychological modifications ensured emotional stability and social cooperation while maintaining the individual initiative necessary for adapting to unexpected challenges. The most ambitious aspect of the New Men Project involved the development of enhanced subjects whose capabilities would approach those of the Primarchs themselves. Bile's analysis of Primarch genetic material had revealed structures of extraordinary complexity that incorporated modifications operating through mechanisms that seemed to transcend normal biological limitations. While complete replication of Primarch-level enhancements remained beyond his current capabilities, partial integration of these genetic elements into his subjects had produced individuals with capabilities that exceeded his previous achievements by significant margins. These near-Primarch subjects possessed physical strength that approached Space Marine levels without requiring gene seed implantation, while their cognitive abilities allowed them to process information and solve problems at rates that exceeded even the most gifted baseline humans. Their sensory organs could perceive electromagnetic spectra invisible to normal human vision, while their enhanced nervous systems provided reaction times that bordered on prescience. Most importantly, these modifications appeared stable across multiple generations of reproduction, suggesting that Primarch-level capabilities could be inherited rather than requiring artificial enhancement for each individual. The implications of successfully creating breeding populations of near-Primarch subjects extended far beyond simple military applications. These beings would possess the intellectual capacity necessary for advancing scientific knowledge at rates that could revolutionize human understanding of the universe within centuries rather than millennia. Their enhanced physical capabilities would enable them to survive in environments that would prove fatal to baseline humans, opening possibilities for colonization of worlds that the Imperium had deemed uninhabitable. Their extended lifespans would allow for accumulation of knowledge and experience that could accelerate cultural and technological development beyond anything achieved by short-lived baseline populations. The potential consequences of Bile's success in creating viable new men populations would fundamentally alter the balance of power throughout the galaxy. The Imperium's control over human populations depended largely on their monopoly over advanced technology and genetic enhancement techniques, advantages that would be negated by the existence of independent communities possessing superior capabilities. The new men's resistance to chaos corruption would make them immune to the influence that the dark gods wielded over baseline humanity, while their enhanced capabilities would make them formidable opponents for any force that sought to subjugate them. The Chaos powers themselves would face unprecedented challenges from populations that could not be corrupted through the psychological vulnerabilities that characterized baseline humans. Slaanesh's influence operated through the exploitation of sensation and desire, weaknesses that Bile's psychological modifications were specifically designed to eliminate. Khorne's corruption required the presence of uncontrolled aggression and bloodlust, characteristics that the new men's emotional stability would prevent. Tzeentch's manipulation depended on uncertainty and ambition, drives that would be channeled constructively rather than destructively in enhanced populations. Nurgle's appeal to despair and decay would find no purchase among beings whose enhanced biology provided resistance to disease and extended lifespans. The Imperial response to successful new men colonies would likely involve massive military campaigns designed to eliminate these populations before they could establish permanent footholds throughout human space. The Imperium's ideology could not tolerate the existence of human subspecies that challenged fundamental assumptions about genetic purity and divine will, while the practical threat posed by technologically advanced populations beyond Imperial control would demand immediate action. However, the enhanced capabilities of new men subjects would make conventional military approaches ineffective, requiring development of specialized tactics and weapon systems that the Imperium might not possess. The Space Marine chapters would face particular challenges when confronting new men populations, as their traditional advantages in physical capability and tactical coordination would be negated by opponents with similar or superior enhancements. The psychological conditioning that made Astartes effective warriors might prove counterproductive when facing enemies who possessed equivalent dedication combined with superior flexibility and creativity. The chapter's reliance on established combat doctrines could become a liability against opponents who could adapt and innovate faster than Imperial forces could respond. The Adeptus Mechanicus would likely view new men populations with a mixture of fascination and horror, recognizing the technological implications of their achievements while rejecting the biological approach to enhancement that contradicted their machine-focused philosophy. The Tech Priest's understanding of genetic engineering might enable them to develop countermeasures more effectively than other imperial organizations, but their adherence to established protocols could limit their ability to respond to innovations that operated outside conventional technological frameworks. The long-term survival prospects for Bile himself remained uncertain, despite his consciousness transfer technology and multiple backup bodies. The complexity of maintaining his research network while avoiding elimination by imperial forces or corruption by chaos powers required constant vigilance and adaptation that even his enhanced capabilities might not sustain indefinitely. The success of the New Men project could potentially make his continued existence unnecessary, as self-sustaining populations would no longer require his direct oversight to continue their development and expansion. However, Bile's role as the architect of human genetic enhancement would likely ensure his continued relevance even if individual colonies achieved independence. His accumulated knowledge and experience represented irreplaceable resources that would be crucial for addressing challenges that enhanced populations might encounter during their expansion throughout the galaxy. The development of new enhancement techniques and the adaptation of existing modifications to different environments would require expertise that only he possessed, making his survival valuable even to populations that no longer needed his direct protection. The potential for other individuals to replicate his achievements presented both opportunities and threats for the future of human enhancement. The systematic documentation of his techniques and the training of disciples had created knowledge bases that could theoretically enable independent research programs even if his own operations were disrupted. However, the complexity of his methods and the resources required for advanced genetic modification would limit the number of individuals capable of continuing his work at comparable levels of sophistication. The influence of his research on the broader scientific community would likely accelerate regardless of his personal fate, as the principles he had discovered would eventually be rediscovered by other researchers working independently. The fundamental insights into human genetic potential and enhancement methodology represented scientific advances that could not be permanently suppressed, even by the most determined imperial efforts at censorship and control. The existence of enhanced subjects throughout the galaxy would serve as proof that human limitations could be transcended, inspiring others to pursue similar research despite the risks involved. The ultimate legacy of Fabius Bile would be determined not by his individual survival, but by the success of the vision he had spent millennia developing and implementing. The New Men project represented humanity's potential for evolutionary advancement beyond the constraints imposed by natural selection, imperial dogma, or chaos corruption. Whether this vision would be realized through his direct efforts or through the work of others inspired by his example, the transformation of human potential that he had initiated would continue to influence the galaxy's development for millennia to come. The 41st millennium had witnessed the emergence of possibilities for human evolution that challenged every established assumption about the species' limitations and potential. Bile's work had demonstrated that genetic enhancement could produce stable improvements without requiring supernatural intervention or accepting corrupting influences. The choice between transcendence and stagnation would ultimately be determined by humanity's willingness to embrace scientific advancement despite the opposition of those who sought to maintain existing power structures through ignorance and superstition. In the end, Fabius Bile's greatest achievement lay not in any single creation or discovery, but in proving that human potential remained unlimited for those with the knowledge and courage to pursue it. The galaxy would continue to bear the mark of his influence long after his final death, as the seeds of transformation he had planted would grow into possibilities that even he could not have fully envisioned. The eternal experiment would continue, driven by the inexorable logic of evolution and the human desire to transcend the boundaries that others accepted as immutable truth.